270 million years ago, the thorough Permian period was swiftly evolving without severally eradicating the miser lizards. The mangy reptiles do possess the aqueous corticosteroids and viscous pheromones on the gigantic Earth. The satirical reptiles have gone through the majestic manipulations of the astute natural phenomena since the birth on the brute Earth. The native living organism do have a caustic tremor on the varmint organism's muscles because of the critical void in the aquatic species and the land reptiles which are living in sync in a small population. The shrieked reptiles are living in symbiosis on top of the colossal Pangaea. The types of lively reptilians are pestilently creeping on top of the galactic Earth. The drafting sea is providing a cool shelter to the skimping trilobite. The rancid trilobites have lived up to 270 million years ago on the healthy planet Earth. The magnate trilobites are fighting with synergies and praying to remain alive on the inside of the vile animal kingdom. The cozy trilobites are attempting to avoid the deathly squeeze by the angular predators or face the terminal extinction on the inside of the shrill animal kingdom. The chivalrous trilobites are different sizes, shapes and have the scientific names. The various trilobites are defensively harsh as a manic arthropod. The twitching eyes are transmitting the images leisurely to the hydrated trochlear IV nerve for the globules awareness often used to quietly escape the engraving memes onto the trilobitomorpha exoskeleton for throughout the surrounding ocean aqua. The tricky trilobite has lived among the splashy marine organisms. The jostling trilobite does possess a exoskeletal hard shell. The smooth trilobite did crawl cautiously on top of the sharp sand. The pragmatic trilobite would strikingly drag the geometric cephalon. On top of the tough labrygina, there is the sheathing preglabella and shielding glabella in use as the scuffed armor for the remainder of the crimson conquest on top of the tanned ocean sand. The locking eyes are mounted below the ridged glabella and above of the biophysical preglabella on the transient stock of the logistical trilobite. The meiotic cephalon are continuing to add the protection to the guarded cerebrum. The genal spine does curve around of the connective thorax. The axle rings do begin at the caustic thorax, and the axle rings do become smaller while going down the back of the shifting shell in order that crunching is made possible. The expansive thorax is made up of the thick calcite, so the supportive weight in the pleural furrow and pleural spine on the desirable trilobite will empower the stable stance. The pleuroparts are made of a durable calcite to cover the straggling legs. The malignity pygidium is the third segmental tergite because the mobile crunching and malvolent trilobite abdomen. The horse termite is separated through the tough backbones. The back calcite has a mobility because of the interconnecting tergites. The collapsible tergite are surroundingly protected by the dense interpleural furrow, enduring pleural furrow and enigmatic rib. Once again, the structured pygidial spine is protruding from the terminal axle piece. All of this anti-penetrable armor does protect the scattering trilobite. The bulging arthropod's veins do require the fresh hemoglobin on the inside of all of the hard vessels. The juvenile trilobites are the largest population of the Earth's species. The trilobite species to date, there is a taxon record of over the 15,000 species of the trilobite gamut. The squatting trilobite's feet will sprawl on top of the ambient Earth. Inside of the deep ocean, the inadequate trilobite has left the abundance of the permanent serology traces and fossils onto the ocean floor. The cold rocks are drawing the force of the water molecule and thrashing bold erosion on the surface of the tepid rock. The lumpy rock's inertia is a stable surface to become the deathbed for the aged arthropod. Also, the sovereign trilobite evidence is left onto the plumb ground. To this day, the idiosyncratic trilobite has left a microcosm on the inside of the encapsulated planet. The organic trilobites have left the forensic evidence across of the infallible planet. The brisk arthropod's history is left around the ocean superposition for the dedicated scientist. The endangered trilobite has become identified as extinct on the surface of the geode site. The sticky tentacle Orthoceras would consentingly swim through the white and salty ocean. The calm ocean activity is soothingly emitting a transverse wave while wind blows gust at the speed of 6.6 meters per second onto the cyan blue ocean. The mechanical wave thermohaline naturally does emit the neutral force to create a high crest and equally low trough on the inside of the ocean's surface is sodium chloride water. The tetrahedral shape of the surface of the water hydrology is concurrently passing the ocean's magnitude for the four amplitudes to complete the tangible ocean tide. The Palalassic Ocean is commensurably amenable while drifting and drafting by the force of the earth elements. The ocean water is constantly self-cleansing by the maneuverable formation of the aqua waves. The tranquil sea is preferably instant by the cycle of the ocean sea level. The controlling temperament climate does unanimously satisfy the aqua life forms. The tamping conditioning of the ocean waves, so the pure water waves do maintain the carrying capacity per square mile of the azure water. The ocean water does have a conservation sheltering of the ocean's hereditary livestock. The ocean dependently is organized while procuring the lived lifespan to the last day of the mortality date on the inside of the teal ocean. The Tethys Ocean's blue sea water is a habitable fish ecosystem. The aquatic volume is macro-sustenant to treat the sea creatures. The ocean salvation of water has prominent supply of the growing creatures. The swimming fish are filtering the watery oxide for the unique gill system's life support. The fish inhalation does have to filter oxygen through the bunched gills. The gill flaps will distillingly act consecutively to remove the mole of the liquid water's oxygen gas for every one of the H2O molecules. The mortal life of the swimming fish does depend on the minimum amount of the oxygen element. The shaper-shifting oxygen mole will secrete into the gill system capillaries. The fish gill capillaries are high in the quaint numbers. The inside of the gushing gills are relying on the fresh air. The variable molecules of oxygen will infiltrate the active transport pump, and the specific open capillary pump will diagnosticate the pure breath. The penetrating molecule will slide through the thin blood vessel, and the transparent oxygen will interact with the red blood cell. The 91.5% water isotonic blood cell will mix with the acidic oxide. The tight blood iron and water will have the adsorption of the air redox oxygen into the frothy blood cell. The gill's blood pressure will continue to suffice the oxygen agent for the health of the fish tissue capillary bed. The complete combustion of the blood cell does maintain the mortality rate of the equilibrated fish. The oxygen blood cell will be inflamed into the puffing hemoglobin. The saturated RBC does pump through the straight ventricle and bent conus ventrissus to get to the heart's pathway. The puffed RBC does go through the contractile pump through the conus ventrissus labyrinth to get to the heart fibers. Now, the fish's deoxygenated blood does enter into the plump sinus venosus and right atrium. The sanguine blood does travel through the functional veins, practical venules, viable capillaries, enabled arterioles and utilitarian arteries into the drenched and flabby flesh. For the rough scales, arable regenesis occurs beyond the blood vessels. The regenerating fish scales need to receive the minimal amount of oxygen gas for the fish's ability to keep swimming on the inside of the foamy Tethys Ocean. The glistening water is flowing over top of the shining seashells. The shimmering seashells are pushed by the ocean current. The seashells will move across of the wet sand. The damp sand does swiftly nestle the ocean floor seashells. The seashells are carried by the quick force of the enchanting wave. The wave does take the seashell all the way to the goopy algae and dry salty shoreline. The truncated icosahedron seashell does wash up on the sediment beach sand. The stable seashell will remain on the blue beach. The soft shore will cradle the ocean shell. The rounded shell will lay innately above of the beach tide at the open shore. The rising tide will push and pull whenever increasing the frequent drifting pattern of the carbonic waves. The carbon-14 isotope is commensurable whenever the mixing and transporting processes are occurring within the deep trypan ocean. The large wave force will splash over the braised seashell and drag back the colorful seashells. The sodium salt does comprise of the 2.6% of the Earth's crust. The recruiting marine plankton are dependent on the sensitivity of the ocean marine environment. The ocean's temperature is acting to bioaccumulate the marine plankton dinoflagellates. The plankton dinoflagellates' nutrient concentration is accrued on the less dense side of the opaque oceans. The dinoflagellates do enmass at the contrasting lakes, vignette streams and shady ponds. The diaphoretikes flagellates phagocytosis and mesocytosis are the autotrophic feeding sources of the eating diaphoretikes flagellates. The inside of the alveolar heterotroph plankton have evolution to create the centrifugal food. The plankton's aquatic diet does consist of a tubular opinature suction by the cell membrane, and the diaphoretikes flagellates phagocytosis. Nature will also use the radiant sunlight energy to live with the glowing electric color. The dinoflagellates Arpilorus antiquus do group together near the littoral slope shoreline. The transverse ocean waves will cyclically serve the sparse palolassic, ionized Paleotethys and specialized Tethys. On the Stoic Earth, the stellar Permian period did consist of the rise of the venerated metrodons. The scaly metrodons are well known as the lurking quadrites. The dynamic Edaphosaurus pagonius does have a 2.5-foot sail for the aerodynamic back mechanism. The high sail does assist in the sphenicomorpha hunter for the seeking out the small lizards, minuscule insects and little plants. The 300 kg lizard is able to start fanning the invected sail tip yet having the sail protrude from the spinal bones. The land reptile's fin is used to provide the inconspicuous camouflage through the dense agroforestry. The erected sail does add the wind-powered sailing over top of the puddle water. On the ecosanoid's back, the sail bases has a effective anchoring to enforceable add extra rigidity support on the harbored backbone. The sail's base has a fat storage on the middle back areas. The large sail will act as a protection against of the predator attacks as a defensive lead. The lizard sail is in use as a body temperature control and sexual display of comfort in infatuating the other species but gloatingly compromises the attraction of the accompanying dame. The Edaphosaurus pagonius confidence is stemming from the back sail. The antipathic Edaphosaurus pagonius has a eccentric hormonal exocrine whenever fanning the cool sail. The Edaphosaurus pagonius metrodon has a ton of the internal hormonal glands. The Lepidosaurus adrenal gland is ascribed to the genital ridge for the production of the steroidogenic cells for the kidney's adrenal cortex. The modular ectodermal cells are building the cellular anatomy of the novomexicanus kidney's medulla. The absorptive iodine 131 thyroid gland is found on the inside of the salty throat. The fourth pharyngeal pouch will activate the perifollicular calcitonin secretions during the development of the median anlage cells. The Edaphosaurus pagonius perifollicular cells do mature through into the anecdotal bilobed. The secreting thyroid does insist on a vital thyrotropin-releasing hormone and thyroid-stimulating hormone into the metrodon ecosanoid's vessels for the bodily calcium levels. The horse parathyroid does regulate the draining veins through the third and fourth pharyngeal pouches. The fecundate gonads are used to also break down the basic insulin into the formation of the tangy sugars and tender proteins for the compulsory peptide phase of the calcitonin gene. The sphenocodontoid terpene hormones of the large hunter lizards are able to signal the motile molecules and the hormonal molecules while traversing through the Edaphosaurus pagonius circulatory vascular system junction. The ecosanoid's virulent steroids and vile amino derivatives are emanating on the inside of the Cruciger-Palmer flowing bloodstream. The lipid-soluble perifollicular cells will transition into the rest of the big lizard's cellular anatomy. The tough hormonal cells will create the stronger glycosidic boding in order to facilitate the clean levels on the inside of the hormonal tissue levels. The cellular diversity of the perifollicular cell does transform into the bulk back muscle. The hormonal paracrine cells are engaging into the alternative mood cells for the signal change the dynamic types of the 22 hormonal amino acid molecules. The hormonal amino activity will continuously signal the metrodon's organs for the regulated bodily function to secrete the necessary sugary fluid. The metrodon's signaling molecular formula from the will conjure endocrine secretion while attacking the gonads, digestive systems and brain-soluble sugars. The sugary hormones will fight the fat lard molecule and squeeze out the useless toxins for the pure muscle. The pumping lymphatic vessels will release interstitial fluid and absorb the toxin resin. The useless waste is absorbed into the lymphatic vessels and brought to the distilling kidney before the typical disposal through the urethral opening. The carnal scutosaurus has lived near the swishing Russian, European, earth shores. The beastly decinodonts are known universally as the defiant theraspids, leaving wherever the deep footprints. The stumbling decinodonts did stiflingly have a strong tusk for keeping a head held high on top of the dry badlands. The confident decinodont does scoot with the lizard packs. The ghastly Veranopody are vertebrates which will use the estivation to hide from the hot sunlight. The amniotus intuition is to find cover underneath of the tersphere level. Inside of the pleasing ocean, the suspended planet has raised the scurrilous Tylosaurus proriger and the panicking Carcharodon megalodon on the inside of the hearty ocean. The flesh-eating shark does digest the types of the aquatic species. The carnivorous species of lamniforms do have a mechanical digestion through the inside of the oral cavity. The freaky shark does chomp onto the Coelacanth granulatus raw fish. The 6-inch teeth do churn, grind and chew the Latimeria chalumni. The chomping Carcharodon megalodon has a chemical digestion on the inside of the salivatory glands. The saliva tyalin is secreted into the mouth for the breakdown of the tough Latimeria chalumni food. The devouring mouth hydrolysis does saturate the stingent food and enzymatically dilapidate the digestible molecule. The funky shark does swallow the thick Coelacanth granulatus bolus. The cartilaginous rings do have a contractile synthesis to swallow the bunched food. The esophagus muscles do pass downward the bulging food throughout the long throat, and the peristalsis biofeeding mechanism will drag down the stinky food. The sustenance mush does arrive into the enclosed J-shaped sac. The heavy bolus does fall into the compressing fundus. The gaseous fundus does absorb the many gases because the emissions of the chemical digestion, and the light gases stored across of the stomach fundus. The stimulated antrum will release the stomach's hormonal endocrine through the fluid-filled system. The stomach vitamin C acid is acidic gastric juice compensatingly is eating at the rich chymus. After the hot zymogen, the pepsin enzyme is used to break down the sequential chyme. The high acidic fluid does surround the dense chyme. The chyme enzymes are made up of the dense protein. The protein molecule will act as a hot catalyst to produce the enzyme peptidase for the breakdown of the fish's tissue. The catalyst-covered brawn will speed up the dechiariating chymus into the formulation of the shark's lard. The catabolic reaction has an activation energy to release into the bumpy chyme for the brink of the functional group. The molecules are detached and remade into an undeveloped enzyme. The activation energy will alter the broken enzyme piece. The activation energy will rise the energy level of the swimming sharkerodon megalodon pectoral girdle fin energy. The biological activation energy is forming the physical shape of the functional group. The functional group active site on the enzyme has a stomach lining with the amino acid groups. The amino acid does have a peptidase area for the molded substrate. The molecular substrate will solely fit the one way into the limited space. There are 6 classes of the functional class for the anabolism of the substrate, toughest version of the molecule for the mass of the bodybuilding sharkerodon megalodon. The oxidoreductase does involve the oxygen redox reaction to transform the osteochthys fat. The catalyst transferase will transfer a functional group for extra support in the creation of the other fat. The hydrolases is including the salivas help to build a lipid molecule. The lysases double bond will either break or fabricate a dry molecule after splitting the drier fish meat. The isomerase functional group will chance from the similar isomers for the chubby piece. The ligase codons are at the start of the bonded hormone for the compact fat. The pungent sucrase will take apart the sugary actin pterygi connective tissue. The alcohol dehydrogenase will disassemble to the natural alcohols on the inside of actinopterygi latimeria chalumni. The deoxyribonucleic acid synthase is the enzyme used to filter the cellular anatomy of the healthiest fish. The vigorous deoxyribonucleic synthase will use the smooth tissue for the deoxyribonucleic acid on the inside of the sharkerodon megalodon reproductive system specimen. The functional group does fit an atom into the active site, and allosteric site will fit other atoms' chemical properties for the metabolic pathway. The 7 functional classes do fill the denaturing sites for the concentrated molecule. The metallized ions are a cofactor in the formation of the fatty molecule. The elements are drained and distilled, although leaving the elements copper, zinc and iron. The precursor B vitamin will create a coenzyme. The coenzymes are a potent energy storage for the thresholding thiamine, powerful niacin, charged riboflavin and tolerated folic acid through the assimilating enzymatic site. The forceful prerequisites are the initiating nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide hydrogenase, starting vitamin C and ready D. The allosteric site is competitively manipulating the shape of the lard molecule feedback. The retrying functional group will continue to adapt to complete the formation of the adipocyte shape. The fidgeting allosteric site is finally successful on the enzyme, and the active site will take part throughout the production of the chemically structured lard. The fat molecule is fabricated and swept into the shark body, but pushing the leftover biproduct through the shark chondrichthy's stomach. The assembled adipocyte will have a glycosidic bonding into the muscular fin. Slowly the fat molecule will have a hormonal transformation into a mighty myocyte and once again leave the toxins. The bicarbonate mucosa layer does reinforce the stomach lining of the curvaceous tummy. On the inside of the stomach, the small villi do absorb the typical nutrients. The sensory signaling will relay to the brain's vagus nerve. The chemoreceptors will receive input from the filling stomach and send the signal throughout the warm gastric glands. The sensitive brain does receive the satisfaction level of the full stomach. The sharkerodon megalodon full stomach of Coelcanthus granulatus 2.0 puissance hydrogen does bust the tough food and cause mayhem to destroy the infectious bacteria. The food consumed has a ratio of the expunged 10 bad bacteria to the 1 good bacteria on the inside of the immune stomach. Excluding the extremophile Helicobacteria pylori, the dangerous bacteria are slaughtered on the inside of the digesting stomach. The parietal cells do secrete a glycoprotein and hydrochloric acid used to hormonally burn the calories. The dissociation of the chyme phase does have to be in order to transfer the chloric and sugary chyme onto the closed pyloric valve. In the appropriate conditions, the antrum does collect the molecular pool and redirect the stomach stimulants into the stuffed intestines. The beginning duodenum of the small intestine does resume the chemical digestion of the minerals and nutrients through the tons of the active capillaries. The compact duodenum will release the plupotent disaccharidases and peptidase enzymes onto the condensed food. The peptide hormone is moving in enterogestrone slow motion for the digestive tract. The peptide monomers are aiding the activation of the accessory organs. The savoring duodenum does release the contractile element of the powerful cholecystokinin. The cholecystokinin secreted while the chyme does pass through the duodenum for the breakdown on the inside of the small intestine. The bile salts do transform dispersively into the emulsifying cholesterol for the creation of the stretching micelles. The small intestine does lead the disassembling nutrients further into the small intestine. The tubular jejunum and ileum are completing the absorption of the submersive nutrients. The large intestine is a hollow tube being used to subsume the watery juices. The hydrostatic large intestine will suck in the fluid for the balance of the shark's 11 systems. The aquatic large intestine does extend its way to the spacious colon. The wide colon does split into the left colon for the ascending colon. The ascending colon will pass the absorbed nutrients into the gaping cecum. The skewing cecum does mix the fluids and lubricant into the narrow veniform appendix for the removal of the toxic bacterial waste. The right colon will transition into the descending colon, into the sigmoid colon. The sigmoid colon peritoneal folds are using a loop for the control of the excretion sending off the indigestible and toxic defecation. The mesentery lining is conduced into a sequential shape to withstand the pressure into a conscious release of the gross feces. The squishing rectum will help in the subservient processes of the voluntary excretory system. The controlled sphincter muscle is a expandable valve being used to release the fecal matter into the Tachi's anus for the disposal of the waste into the ocean. The ocean water does immediately have a gravitational pull upward with the active force of gravity. Meanwhile, any living organism is on the inside of the comfortably snug water, so the smooth excretion will be hourly evacuated out of the anal canal. The seawater has a downward 35 parts per trillion gravity of the 1.026 marine gravity force. The ocean water does relieve the weight of the hosted nate organisms. The water is able to create the gravitational attraction on average by being fully submersed into the separating liquid. The water's natural gravity density does act as a resistance to aid in suspending the healthy fish. The ocean's atomic abundance of elements under the coelacanth granulatus fish to supportively relieve the weight of the 50-ton shark. The buoyant force does balance with the water pressure of the Palalassic Ocean for the floating shark. The weight of the shark is acting against of the water power to bring up the treading megalodon. The ocean and mass of the sharkerodon megalodon is increased by a straddle to 5 meters per second through the water gravitational law. The ocean water does have a cycling filtration through the flat ocean floor. The ocean ground does use a recycling distillation on the inside of the tan sand floor. The ocean ground is able to drain the contaminated water. The ocean surface will slowly remove the contempt bacteria. The gathering bacteria are shook and turned vigorously to reduce the suction onto the adorning bedrock sand. The water bacteria is forced into the depth of the ocean floor for the cleansing rustling grains of the brown sand. The traveling deep water through the earth will effectively shift and grind the green bacterial species. The bacteria promptly does compress fully mash through the compact sand. The ocean's bacteria is grinned up through the deep layers of the heavy purifying grains of the sand. The carbon swishing is formed into a concentration of the 730 parts per million to as high as 2000 parts per million at the Earth's core. The carbon atoms through bonding do preservatively refurbish the Earth's salvageable H2O. The recycling water is performing the green bacterial biodegradation by squeezing and squishing while dissoluting the E. coli bacteria. The E. coli plasmid-mediated quinolone's resistance is denatured self-efficacently by the filtering refinement of the skimping sand. The chlorinic synthesis is a reactive synergy by introducing the exacerbating heat to the hosting organism biome. The ocean's ecosystem has to self-cleanse to reduce the ocean sickness to the marine life forms. The aquatic species are possessive of the typical healthy plasmids which are found on the inside of the reliable bacteria for the cellular independent circular double-stranded topoisomerases. The biological marine pathological virus is enforced with the resistant B. lactam antibiotic structural conjugative sex pilus for the reproductive plasmid protein, so the bacterial species are capable of transmitting the activation vision. The threatening extended spectrum beta-lactamases through the earth ground are liberating the bacteria static spectroscopy which is infecting the native ocean water. The slick bacteria are broken apart into the smaller particles and can be carried away without spreading and contaminating the shark's ecosystem. These lingering E. coli bacteria species are viably belonging to the sacred fish. On the earth's grass, the drabby dimetrodons have promenaded across of the gleeful pangae. The gloomy dimetrodons are guilt-free on top of the binding pangae. The active reptiles have begun to inherit their close quarters on the healthy earth. The uncharted territory is remaining hospitable to the vigilant reptilians. The free-for-all domicile is open concept to be explored by the berserk reptiles. The unnerved Celiadida will fly liberally across of the Kelly rainforests. The jumping plantless are active on the round planet, and the executical Ephemeroptera and Paleoptera odonata are sharing the sage forests. These flying insects are the deplorable mayflies and gliding damselflies which will grow to a large size near the shallow puddles, shoal swamps and depthless grottos. The grazing damselflies are using the stratogematic mesencephalon on the inside of the irregular cranium for the inferior and superior rictus and inferior and superior oblique on top of the eye's vitreous fluid. The collagen eyes do possess aquatic humor and smooth surface on the curvaceous eyes. The brawny pronoun is separating the stern head and the protractile thorax on the crammed damselfly. The narrow spine is covered by the lumpy flesh. The moss-green damselflies does possess the goffard antehumeral stripes and coenagrian spur on top of the equal thorax. The flapping wing is found on a 23.5-degree angle stemming from the archaic thorax, but the modernized wings are contouringly circulating the entire perimeter along of the bare pterostigma. The long abdomen is contractingly thin, intensely powerful and biologically stalwart. The frangible abdomen does lead into the anal appendage of the bleak damselfly. The brutish insect is an invertebrate in order to stay protected on the gentle earth. The larger Paleoptera odonata also will live near the clean water. The territory Pangaea is 57,308,738 square miles of the sturdy land. The land formation did remain intact on the surface of the earth crust but shifting by 0.8 inches to 1.2 inches per annum underneath of the earth's stratosphere. The tectonic plate gaps are sacrosanct on the rustling earth for the earth core. The stagnant plantae do subtly emerge from the earth crust. The moss leucospids have associated to the club of the shamrock bryophytes. The oozing cytoplasts and lime chlorophyll are used as the herbal remedies to the flagrant critters, immersible animals and scrawny fish. The juniper bryophytes have nuzzlingly sprouted the mighty stems. The natural blossoms on the wrangling Pangaea were found across of the solid rock, barky trees and liquid water. The colorful plantae are responsible to maintain the 24% of the oxygen gas on the feisty earth. The plant's cycle are the constituents which have sent around the pure oxygen. The dynamic plants have provided oxygenic purity on the inside of the spherical paradigm of the climactic globe. The puny Archaeognatha would jump across of the detritus ground. The jumping bristletails are defensively mobile on top of the bustling ground. The insecta biome is a tethering home for the conglomerate of species. The occupant's liberty on the inside of the biosphere is exacerbated by the carnal needs developing on the top of the biodiverse scenical biota. These small insects are responsible to satisfy the food chain through the advantageous Pangaea. The Permian extinction has happened to cause vein on top of the cerulean blue and lime green properties of the planet Earth. The Permian extinction has desecrated the 83% of the incubated genera for the orbiting Earth. The tall plantae are maladaptive to the cubic feet of the banal soil. The hostale plant was an important source of nutrition for the plant-eating insects. The respiteful earth has had the cataclysmic effects onto the feasible earth. The relaxing earth has become patchy across of the planet Earth and the swaths of bugs are eating the forestry patches at a time of the harlequin brush. The Leptosica cycad was a palm-like tree with the pinny-shaped leaves. The polar regions were damp, moist and temperate. The Triassic era begins 230 to 3,245,000 years ago across of the calendar circa on the quaint Pangaea. These years, the epoch has included the Inouan mass extinction period in the 130,083,000 square kilometers of the Gaiety Earth. The Inuan mass extinction did occur early on the inside of the Mesozoic epoch through the rotating planet. The vigorous Triassic is continuing with the Elenchian period on the round planet. The divine reptilians have lived through the Mesozoic epochs on the achieved Earth. The dinosaurs throng have rectifyingly lived off of the vacant land. The Anisian period is regrowing the fundamental plantae. The plethora of trees have begun to sprout the adventitious, tap and fibrous root on the inside of the rapturous globe. The jeering plants have an organic cycle on the rotating Earth. The Bujan fauna have grown the parakeet green color on the spiky Cyclades. The acicular pines have maintained a acidic pH through the pine peak. The Elenchian eon. The green ferns have begun to grow on the inside of the tons of the dense ground. Subtly, the soft Cinderia in the Landinian were recovering from the returning chance of extinction on the inside of the flowing ocean water. The water tide has changed across of the littoral shore. The ebullient earth is inhabiting the frightening dinosaurs. During the Anisian, the first dinosaur is unearthed as the germ Nyasasaurus parringtoni. The organism Nyasasaurus parringtoni did live 243 million years ago on top of the globular earth. The plant-eating Nyasasaurus parringtoni did eat the gentle gymnosperms. The types of trees are acidic on the inside of the pointy pines. The redwood sequoiaceae tree is in the family of the Cupressaceae, includes the largest and tallest trees. The conifer tree would provide a high potency of the powerful vitamin A for the Nyasasaurus parringtoni. The healthy antioxidants are drastically improving the cellular tissue, and the durable keratin integumentary system is lathered with the preservative antioxidants. The keratin origin is found on the chromosome 12 for the automatic alterations of the regimenting autosome gene. The protective allele is able to concrete the armored dinosaur. The shielded dinosaur. The antioxidantized keratin are nature's resources to the responsive immune system for the ravenous Nyasasaurus parringtoni. The awful toxins would not be able to infect the vulnerable cells because of the liquescent antioxidants. So the keratin morale of the Nyasasaurus parringtoni could grow on the classic dinosaur. The dreadful dinosaur is helping itself to prevent the rheumatic arthritis, keratin infections and flu colds interfering with the consterned extremities. The antioxidantized keratin are nature's resources to the responsive immune system for the ravenous Nyasasaurus parringtoni. The awful toxins would not be able to infect the vulnerable cells because of the liquescent antioxidants. So the keratin morale of the Nyasasaurus parringtoni could grow on the classic dinosaur. The dreadful dinosaur is helping itself to prevent the rheumatic arthritis, keratin infections and C3H6O3 flu colds interfering with the consterned extremities. The mid-Triassic evolution did begin to evolve the types of the new species. The available Sea of Pangaea and the earth crust has raised the yield of the sparky mongrels and the birth nests. The divine reptilians have lived through the Mesozoic epochs on the achieved Earth. During the Anisian and the Landinian, the bulky dinosaurs have adequately appeared on the round Earth. The proliferate dinosaurs have started to rule the compact Earth global demographics. The hungry dinosaurs are well known as the cyclothymic reptiles or terrible lizards to the close-packed globe. There is a bitter dinosaur being called the miserable Coelophysis boreae. The mashing Coelophysis boreae is a carnivore across of the developing Pangaea. The prickly herbivorous Coelophysis boreae will eat the refreshing plants and feed on the disintegrating carcasses. The safeguarding Coelophysis boreae does run through the shallow forests and prey with the innocent dinosaurs. The disruptive Coelophysis boreae will grow to be a total of the 15 to 20 kilograms on the hospice of the roosting Earth. The genus Meganosaurus did espouse the Coelophysis boreae tricks. The rebellious carnivorous dinosaur is slender and would grow up to the 3 meters with the aggressive pack. The scaly reptiles do have the 3 or 4 chambers on the strong heart. The red and blue blood is cold or hot on the inside of the circulatory vascular system of the coping dinosaur theropods. The cold-blooded Coelophysis boreae dinosaurs are releasing the Gibbs-free energy as the leering herbivores. The cold blood does not require as much of the thermal powerful energy to complete the critical functions on the inside of the 11 systems. On top of the gaping muck, the 2 categories of agile reptiles are bipedial saurischian, quadrupedial ornithischia and facultative pedial, which do prowl entirely onto the tending land mass. In the fossil-preserving terration, the larval Gerathorax pulcherimus did walk and splash through the groggy streams. The whacking Plagiosaurid did measure the entire 3 feet. The amphibian flat body has a sum of the 4 legs, 3-chamber blood-filled heart, two sides of the respiratory external gills and the one chubby tail to make up the mesomorphic somatoform. The dodgy eyes are close together on top of the oval head. The carnivorous Gerathorax pulcherimus does eat the swamp fish on the inside of the olive-green water. The Middle Age of the Jurassic had the edifying Alenian, raising Bajocian, tending Bathonian, and uplifting Coluvian to provide a effective habitat to the frightening dinosaur. As the fragrant zygotes, the fresh angiosperms are giving a potent flavor of the ester fruit or the healthy vitamins to the famished herbivores and hungry omnivores as the gloomy reptiles. The Triassic Eon did continue into the Carnian Eon on top of the compact planet. The warming ecosystems are mass-producing the sessile and Antherophyta plants. The distinctive ester trait of this group is emitted out of the consummating flower bud. The Antherophyte's bud has a cluster of the highly specialized petal leaves for the reproductive filial. The terpenoids hydrocarbons are another class among which releases from the plant's leaves for the prodigious amounts of polluted air. The terpenoids forming the mountain haze does make the mollifying morning on top of the Rocky Mountains. The mountain's environmental horticulture are blossoming the treasured flowers. The colorful mountain flowers are soothing to the inside of the below grassland tropics. The astonishing flowers are entirely embodying to the flourishing hormones for the nature commitment to the Smoky Mountain. The Anthophyta fauna are divided into two groups based on the emerging number of the embryo cotyledons. The flower monocots and dicots are classifying the Antherophyta plants for the responsibility of the aeroembryo. The plant fertilization can occur only if the pollen grains are transferred from the anther into the pistil stigma. The fauna pollination process requires each of the pistil for the enrolled leaf-like structure. The carpal single megasporophyll will act to modify the seed-bearing leaf. The ovules do lie to be uncovered on the cone scales. The grain pollen is slowly engulfed through the reproductive ovaries. The pollen grain will reach the ovary stigma edema and latheringly germinates. The pollen tube growthfully will protrude saphidly from the generating bearing fauna. This appenditure tube is containing the two of the male gametes for extending into the ovary. The male gametes will obtain entry into the pulsing ovule. The male sporophyte will discharge its two of the male gametes for ensuring the one zygote does fertilize the egg cell. The fauna cell will become a propulsive embryo. The other male gamete does join with two of the polar nuclei, so the endosperm formation will enlarge the fruit seed. The local plants on Pangaea are taunt-amountingly intrinsic to the life of the terpene pulp forest. The esquire flower is a compellingly ambient emission from the pristine pollen. The Sireneous quell of the peculiar flowers are made from the Venger flowers. The powerful colors are accentuating to the macrocosmos forest. The indestructible atoms of the geostratigraphy ground layers are rich on the majestic earth. The autotrophic plants have vastly grown into the high numbers through the Triassic epoch on the inside of the commingled dirt. The trampled earth was exposing the mineralized dirt. The constantly replenishing dirt is raising the rare garden beds. The Osise's rich soil was usually only temporary before a giant heat wave on the arable dirt. Slowly, the luminous oasis would be revealed after the disparaged heat and parching water source have collected a orthotic oasis. The scarce areas of the forest flowers are surrounded by the desert and infertile ground. The carbon-polluted land would become again empty underneath of the climate-changing temperature before being turned to the deserted badlands, and the badlands drought would force out the migrating herds of the raging dinosaurs. The anchored flight of the analogous phylum was arriving into the peripheral vision of the grunting dinosaurs. The first birds have presently appeared into the Triassic era on top of the exalted Earth. These quick aves are forcefully enabling the mastication with their mighty, slick and white teeth. The flawless pterosaurs have supervised the curing Earth, but the ravished pterodactyls are becoming inadvertently famished by the appearance of the large eggs. The soaring Patinosaurus and the airborne Eudimorphodon genera are conspiring to eat the white eggs. Optimistically, the parent dinosaur will nurse the creative nest for the 3 months to nestle the tall egg. To suit the dinosaur's thick extremities, the noble dinosaurs have lived in the mid-Triassic on the naturally arrogated land. All of the Earth's dinosaurs did procuringly hatch from the chalky egg. The rampaging Eoraptor lunensis did appear on the Earth during the 231 million years ago on the sublime Earth. The shady eggs do possess the porous exterior on the oval egg. The close egg shell is fabricated from a chemical compound for the protection of the terrifying embryo. The incubated embryo is behind of the calcium carbonate. The rounded egg does contain the viscous albumin for the protection of the choleric dinosaur. The aqueous albumin is able to add a saturation to the drying egg for moistening the environment of the juvenile Euraptor lunensis. The scaly reptile does use the dialectic albumin for the temperature of the aging egg and the ability to feel the comfort on the inside of the reinforced egg. The 90° Fahrenheit is satisfying the cruel dinosaur. Adding the hydration to the oval egg, the regulated albumin is able to absorb the shock of any of the reverberation of the fragile egg. Behind the dreamy albumin, there is the chorion section to bear the baby Euraptor lunensis. The stretched chorion is an amphiprodic layer being used to separate the humorous yolk and the measured albumin on the interior of the provoked egg of the Euraptor lunensis. The jelly yolk sac is a permeable layer to protect the rich yolk. The tenable yolk is made up of the earth metal iron, vitamin A, D, phosphorus, alkali metal calcium, thiamine and riboflavin being combined to nourish the ravenous reptile. The hollow allantois does serve as the respiratory system across of the separated chorion. The transverse amnion will add the fluid balance to act defensively against of the colorless egg. On the inside of the egg, the mean dinosaur is inhaling and exhaling the noble gas. The transparent oxygen does pass through the sequestered alimentary canal. The oxygen mass will enter the open mouth, esophagus, trachea, larynx, pass the blocking epiglottis, arrive at the bronchiole, bronchi and alveoli before entering into the sanguine capillaries. On the inside of the one-cell thick capillaries, the oxygen fuel will enter into the redirecting pulmonary veins. The oxygenated blood will arrive at the left atrium to go through the mitral valve and enter into the left ventricle and exit through the aorta. The blood will circulate into the pulmonary artery of the contractile heart. Inside the inferior vena cava, the gaseous blood will circulate through the circulatory vascular system for the circadian rhythm of the corrupt dinosaur. The heart's lubricant pericardial fluid does lather the pumping myocardium for the comfortable homeostasis. The valid bones of the dinosaur are protected by the periosteum flap. The intermedullary will sometimes contain the soft bone marrow. The baby dinosaur does have a hot pink, cadmium yellow or ochre red bone marrow. The hot pink bone marrow is found on the inside of the specific bones for the wild dinosaur. The colored bone marrow will produce the numbers of the stem cells for the endogenous anabolism of the blue erythrocyte. The level parietal bone and polished frontal bone are on top of the flat skull. The glossy occipital bone, sheeny temporal bone and easy shenoid bone do make up the rest of the untroubled cranium. The superior nuptial line curve is ending at the plain sailing mastoid process and well stupendous external acoustic meatus. The round opening of the bony orbit has two of the gaping holes to fit in the eye socket. The glassy maxilla and flush mandible do make up the mighty jaw. The stern costochondral junction is lain across of the center of the dinosaur ribcage. The rounded suprasternal notch is positioned above of the manubrium of sternum found near the top of the suspended ribcage. The arching clavicle is fastened securely to support the designed ribcage via the sinewy conoid coracochromial, coracroclavicular ligament, trapezoid coraclavicular ligament and the acromioclavicular ligament, and to provide the motility to the upper skeletal system of the acrimonious Euraptor lunensis shoulders. The blunt body of sternum does connect the left and right Euraptor lunensis ribcage. The dromaeosaurid costal cartilages are becoming closer together while leading upward to the close encountering xiphoid process and nearby xiphisternal junction. The Euraptor lunensis ribcage does descend to the spine-tingling floating ribs at the bottom of the ribcage frame. The cervical bones are descending to the axis. The dinosaur vertebrae have a posterior tubercle for the pointy atlas. The superior articular facet has curvaceous edge. At the edge, the transverse foramen are circular holes near the widest sides of the spinal bones. The thinnest part of the vertebrae are known as the slender dens. The transverse process are protruding through the left and right side of the long Euraptor lunensis spine. The top thoracic vertebra is a part of the defensive spine. The connected thoracic does continuously extend the angled arc into the returning degree of the bony lumbar. The low sacral are propping up the spine of the Euraptor lunensis coccyx hook. The large cylindrical ulna and the cylindrosius radius are simultaneously held at the tying up tuberosity. The dromaeosaurides lower back does possess the arching sacrum. Across of the shoulder blade, the collagen coracoclavicular ligament does retain the weight above of the void-filled glenoid cavity for the filling humerus bone. The humerus bone head is a spherical shape fused into the flawless greater tubercle. The surgical neck of the hunched humerus is the useful support for the radial nerve groove. The formed olecranon fossa is a gapping area to connect the banged medial and hit lateral condyle into the trochlear notch for the joining capitulum. The chitering ulna and quaking radius are simultaneously held at the stabilizing tuberosity. The stiffiling radius head is in a downward shape through the bone neck and has a surmounting area at the intimidating radial tuberosity. The broad interserosseous border does descend down into the anterior oblique line before the aerodynamic styloid process and the sleek designed ulnar notch leading down to reconnect to the thin ulna. The vital ulnar olecranon does possess open gap in order to firmly attach to the settling lateral epicondyle. The dull coronoid process has a openature going down to the indelicate radial notch. The supinator crest bluff is narrowing down to the obtuse ulnar tuberosity. The regrouping interosseous border has a elongated shaft to meet at the head and styloid process for the rotational wrist. The motioning pisiform is at the base of the shifting triquetral. The propulsed lunate is entrenchingly moved by the directing scahoid. The opposing lane flexor retinaculum and the equal load-bearing pisometacarpal are adding a transverse movement to the secure wrist. The sublime hamate is and entitling trapezium in front of the long metacarpal bones. The Earaptor lunensis dinosaur waist is connected to the ischemic region, so that the mighty femur joint is covered protectively by the hyaline cartilage which does give the movement to the shifting waist. The drawn-out femur bone has the carved ridges on the head which is leading into the thinning neck valley. The extremities bone has a smooth greater trochanter for the lateral left and right side of the top of the curvy epiphysis. The interior of the top of the leg bone has a epiphyseal plate for the strength on the bone epiphysis. The dense epiphyseal plate is a lot different than the spongy bone on either sides of the solid bone. The multiplex interior of the femur bone has a group of the pumping the blood vessels. The blood vessels' high angiotension walls do pass a viscous fluid through the middle of the femur's diaphysis. The long diaphysis shaft has the compact blood vessels pass up and down the cylindrical central cavity and extend to the connective transverse canals. The strong osteons are a group of the firm osteocytes. The tiny bone cells are solid but do break away into the small osteoblasts before being able to absorb a richer calcium for the active osteoclasts. The tamping osteoclasts are compacted back into a whole piece while assembling the tougher bone. The softer intermedullary cavity of the diaphysis does possess the yellow bone marrow. The healthy bone marrow does support the variety of sizes of the blood vessels. The dinosaur periosteum casing has a blood vessel gap to allow the exiting blood vessel. The angled metaphysis is at the bottom end of the calcified bone which does begin with the lateral right and left epicondyle. The still diaphysis bone is on a ascending valley for the large condyle, so the connecting bone will cohere to the left side of the cartilaginous patella. The slightly movable kneecap is secured by the shape of the blunt medial epicondyle and condyle sinew. The ligament mineralization is a group of softening and hardening structural proteins. The candid collagen is 35% of the whole body protein for the endogenous mineral amino acids to form vigorously into the triple helix. The triple helix bond is a linkage which does move in a rotational clockwise rotation and continuing pattern counterclockwise rotation to add a symmetry to the inaction axis for the synthesizing matrix throughout the blood supplying vessels. The elastic collagen product fibroblast will hold thoroughly onto the heavy bones. The ligament is connecting the depression bone to the joining spherical bone in order to have mobility at the bony joint. The pliable knee is connected to the shin's tibia. The mellow tubercles of the dim intercondyle lamininis are positioned to hold the lower half of the squashy kneecap. The shaded groove on the medial condyle is cylindrically shaped at the top end on the pliant epiphysis bone. The lateral condyle and tensile tuberosity is leading into the diaphysis interosseous border. The ductile medial surface is fused to the springy medial malleolus. The other half of the elastic shin is the thin fibia. The apex tubercle is leading into a sloping greater trochanter. The long and slim shaft is going down to the disc shaft malleus. The resonant malleus is a connective piece by the full-bodied tibia fibula and the ball-shaped talofibular ligament on the growling Earaptor lunensis. The calcaneus bone is rounded and held by the strained calcanea fibula near the unyielding trochlear surface of the taut talus for the support to the bulging heel. The figure-hugging deltoid ligament is a second support attaching to the dinosaur foot. The close-fitting talonavicular ligament is a interwoven collagen triple helices to wrap the shinny neck of talus navicular and tight-fitting cuboid bone. The dainty nugatory cuneiform are small bones which are tightly held but highly mobile in order to control the narrow metatarsals and straight phalanges. The gripping toes are able to be extended and retracted quickly with the movement of the large foot. The hydrostatic pressure of the blood vessel pathway is regulated interdependently because of the cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular system is interdependent on the brain's electroreactions. The brain's total of 20 kW electrostatic kJoules will send down an electric current for the sinoatrioventricular node. There are 60 to 100 electrical circuits in minute on the inside of the ear raptor lunensis. The neural input will shock the small collection of cell. The electric signal will depolarize to contract on the inside of the compact Purkinje fibers. The systolic contraction will increase the volume kick through the beating heart. The interventricular discs contain the menagap junctions to align the cytoplasm cells. The signal is relayed through a circuit to the aqueous atrioventricular nerve. The bundle branches will pass the electric surge into the entire myocardium for the diastolic expansion of the bloody heart. The new blood is involved the integrating erythropoietin processes occurring on the inside of the sheath bone marrow. The bone marrow deoxygenated blood for the scary reptile is ensued into the vessels. The deoxygenated blood will travel through the defensive vessels, resistant veins, strong arterioles, firm arteries and expansible capillaries before the new deoxygenated blood is arriving at the superior vena cava. So the myocardium circadian rhythm may begin to refresh the side of the heart. The deoxygenated blood will pass into the palpitating right atrium, beating tricuspid valve and pulsing right ventricle on the inside of the sinus rhythm heart. The ocha blood will pass through the pulmonary arteries before becoming oxygenated on the inside of the contractile lungs, and the red erythrocytes and white leukocytes have completed the circuit through the circulatory vascular system. Simultaneously, the gas dispersion does occur on the inside of the inflating lungs. The carbon dioxide is exhaled from the regimented lungs and the CO2 molecule will be removed from the pulmonary system of the treacherous ear raptor lunensis. The gaseous CO2 is a combination of the reactants carbon and the two oxygens for the product carbon dioxide. The covalent bond of the carbon dioxide is harmful in the large amounts to the vial embryo. The volumetric carbon dioxide will transform into the 7-puissance hydrogenated carbonic acid. The high carbonic acid will be donating the valence electrons for the chalky shell. The white shell will regularly weaken on the surface of the cooling egg. Meanwhile the ear raptor lunensis grows. The large size of the sordid ear raptor lunensis is adding a pressure to the natural egg. The clear albumin is beginning to dehydrate on the inside of the evolving egg and the dinosaur is eating the pungent phosphorus, vitamin A, D, calcium minerals, thiamine, riboflavin and subtle iron which are on the inside of the white egg. The metric force of the dinosaur is sufficient to add the pressure onto the white egg shell and begin to hatch through the soft nest. The bustling hatchling is cracking the dry shell. Currently, the flailing pterodactyls are triangulating the location of the reptile eggs. The gathering birds have developed the tight teeth. The gripping teeth do want to taste the flavor of the milk white egg. The leathery wings of the pterosaur are able to support the hollow bones for the flight of the superior pterosaur. The pterodactyl wing does begin at the spinal vertebra. The harrowing propatagum and exacerbating pteroid bone are connected to the shrill phalanges. The small hands are only at 1/3 of the size of the propulsive brachiopatagum. At the end of the flailing wing, there are the mature actinofibrils which are being used to support the leathery wing. To balance in the lower sky, the aerodynamic pterodactyl Ornithocephalus antiquus does use the invected uropatagum and the long stiff-hined tail through the rhythmic atmosphere. The scanning pterodactyl Ornithocephalus antiquus would fly down to the leading earth and swallow entirely the dinosaur eggs. The qualified Quetzalcoatlus will devour the opaque eggs. The flying analogous creature does use the 4 chambers on the inside of the ample heart. The Landinian period has merely started to control the terrible lizards. The reptile demographic has shifted on the charted territory. The vicious dinosaurs are repopulating onto the earth grounds. The dinosaur era did pertain to the relaying carnion. The terrorizing dinosaur are fastly developing across of the ideal earth. The lacerating Shindosaurus Brian Smalley does chomp the grass cud. The dense corals have began the powerful calcorination on the inside of the clean oceans. The epistomizing Norian and resonanting Retian. The oval seeds from the Permian period have germinated on the mystical earth. The Jurassic Hitangian circa has perused the spreading plants. The Gangamopterous plants have adapted to the cooling temperature on the molded earth and the harsh environments of the infiltrating cyanobacteria. The cyanobacteria biotics do attempt to infect the vascular system of the beta-lactam Gangamopterous. The imposing cyanobacteria is an inebriant to the plant's immune system. The cellulose pathogens do effectively exonerate the leaf's statuesque. The cell structure is targeted and a host for the cesspool of the harmful bacteria. The course of the Triassic period did end the 145 million years ago on the Sol Earth. The Jurassic changes did start on the incubated Earth for the petrifying dinos. The developing seeds did begin to germinate across of the solitary planet for the resistant plants. The local seeds do sprout through the depth of the compact ground. The oval seed apicatil is a beginning stage of the accentuation of the stem yet above of the straightening stalk. The stem and stalk will have to gracefully grow the stable roots. The hypogeal germination will add a grounding to the flourishing Gangamopteris. Below the earth shell, the abscisic hypocotyl will add the support to the developing Gangamopteris. The detecting Glossoptodales is regularly absorbing the underground water. The layer seed will sprout the first leaf. The elegant cotyledon will become a storehouse of the saved water. The transmitting seed coats will bring the overall senses into an acceptable message for the living Rigbiaceae. While the living seed does become wet from the cool rain, the stable troposphere will continue to draw the H2O and the H3O. There are the three types of the flowing water. The gaseous water has a synthesis reaction of the H2 and 1/2O2, H2O, G. The striking kilojoules required to create a standard enthalpy change of molar formation is -242.76 kilojoules. The water contents of the flowing water do create a vapor gas. The auto-ionization of the water is a consistent epicenter of the Reynolds number for the mixture of the thin water. The fresh water does become lighter by the heat of the hot sun. The light water will rise through the high troposphere. The augmenting temperature of the 33,000-foot troposphere will raise the exceptional water. The variable water molecules will pass through the fast air. The water will pass through the oxygenated sky. The cool sky will become electrically charged by the electrical current of the caducive guiding through the gassy troposphere for the water to pass over. The established pathway of the water does conjunct into the electrostatic clouds. The multivalent electrons do create a total of 44 kilojoules on the inside of the dark clouds. The water molecules cannot rise higher due to the weight of the heavy water, the Newton's law and the air pressure in pascals. The 44 kilojoules will pass through the gray clouds. The electrical current is igniting the conductivity of the cool water. The heavy water will control the fiery of the electrical current on the inside of the humid clouds. The water will begin to drop down from the plentiful clouds. The water will be forming into the H2, 1/2O2, H2O. The energy required to transition the enthalpy change of the molar formation is -283.46 kilojoules through the descent into the favored planet for the living organisms. The water droplets will fall down from the tropic clouds. The water will descend in an adequate amount to fall down to the resounding earth. On the inside of the soil, the Gangamoptera seed did begin to grow on the inside of the wet dirt. The root would sprout through the ground and draw the nutrients from the average speed of the moving planet. The bountiful elements which are required are the nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium for the growth of the healthy seed. Once the copacetic plant does sprout out of the ground, the peaceful plant would begin the cellular respiration on the giving ground of the systemic earth. The C6H12O6 plus 6O2 has a reactant arrow with the chemical combustion of the reactant 6CO2 plus H2O on the plain Earth for the imperial formula to sustain the life on the special Earth. The reaction is catabolic, exergonic and spontaneous. The bolstering plants on the Earth were the twiddling and swiveling Cooksonia and World Archaepteris Silophyton immersing into the awarding Earth. The pacing autotropic reaction will convert the energy storage through the form of the sugary glucose. The electrically charged Kaggle energy will turn into the sacred adenine triphosphate. The cellular respiration does use the four of the stages of the patient plantae. The archival glycolysis will occur on the inside of the green cytoplasm. The net adenine triphosphate is a total of the 2-adenine triphosphate. The nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate ion 2 is created through the cellular respiration of the glorified plantae. The transition reaction will happen through the aqueous mitochondrial matrix. The atomic adenine triphosphate is not produced during this stage of the cellular respiration through the natural botanics of the frolicking Gangamopteris. The fresh CO2 ion 2 and the nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide hydrogenase ion 2 is made through the fertile plant. The nurturing Krebs cycle will have a reaction on the inside of the wet cellular matrix. There will be a total of the 2-adenosine triphosphate. The long and drawn electron transport chain is the fourth stage within the inner mitochondrial matrix. There is a total of the 34 theoretical adenine triphosphate and the 32 real adenine triphosphate having been produced through the Earth's plant. The two ways to produce the adenine triphosphate is the substrate level phosphorylation and the oxidative phosphorylation to form the adenine triphosphate, but only being the cofactor used in the anabolic reactions of a fattening plant. The refracting glycolysis does have the 10 stages for use of the planty B products. The dignified glucose 6C is the primary stage of the glycolysis of the lively plant. There is a lone glucose being interdependent on the cycle of the economical plant, but the lonely glucose does gain the end resulting phosphate of the destined servant. The nutritious adenine triphosphate will continue to donate the phosphate for the production of the methodical adenine dinucleotide phosphate. The reaction is endogonic on the inside of the blossoming Gangamopteris. The second stage is the fructose 6-phosphate. The fructose 6-phosphate will receive a rewarding phosphate, meanwhile the languishing energy. The third stage is the fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. The B products is split into the rational deliquescent glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. The adjective fluid PGAL does possess ichorous dehydroxyacetone phosphate. The juicy DHAP is isomerized into the liquescent glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate PGAL. The newfangled dihydroxyacetone phosphate is a 3-carbon molecule found on the helpful plant. The propyl, but only the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, 3, is produced into the tentative plant. The sixth stage is the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate being able to be sent the nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate cation into the globular nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate hydrogenase. The seventh stage has the responsibly created with the heady 1,3-disphosphoglycerate. The valorous adenine dinucleotide phosphate is turned into the substrate level of the spherical adenine triphosphate. The eighth stage is the 3-phosphoglycerate. The gyrate kinase will rearrange the 3-phosphoglyceric acid for the 2 of the phosphoglycerate. The ninth stage is called the 2-PGA. The glutinous phosphoryl does produce the fresh H2O. The final stage of glycolysis is known to create the turnover phosphonyl pyruvate. The aqueous humor adenine dinucleotide phosphate will transition into the pulpy adenine triphosphate. The registered adenine dinucleotide phosphate is phosphorylated to create the fathomed pyruvate. The Krebs cycle will take place on the inside of the condyle leaf. The firm chlorophyll will control the autocratic Krebs cycle. First there is the circadian rhythmic acetyl GA, oxyl, acylate plus 2 carbon from the acetyl-CoA and citric acid. The phasal B products are oxidized and decarbonized into the healthy isocitrate. The flushed adenine dinucleotide phosphate will turn into the gaseous CO2. The spry nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, succinyl-CoA, NADP reductase enzyme adenine dinucleotide phosphate will transition into the gourmet adenine triphosphate for the creation of the hygienic adenine dinucleotide phosphate. The energetic adenine triphosphate will return to the ADP and the PAR up the adenine dinucleotide phosphate quota to transform into the adenine triphosphate sum. The sparkly succinate is formed on the inside of the fail-safe plant. The phthalate adenine dinucleotide cation will disseminate into the phthalate adenine dinucleotide hydrogenase 2. The simple fumarate is fabricated. The soaking H2O will turn into the malate and the nicotinamide adenosine dinucleotide cation before turning into the self-satisfied nictinamide adenine dinucleotide hydrogenase. The speeding cycle is repeated throughout the life of the commensurable plant. The in-effect electron transport chain will pass the concentration of the hydrogen through the gradient of the cell wall. The edema hydrogen will go through the ubiquinone and become electrically charged during the alteration of the procurrent electron transport chain. The entrenched nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide hydrogenase reductase and dehydrogenase will occur through the electron transport chain of the shimmering Gangamopteris. The hydrogen cation will get through to the inner matrix of the secure plant. The succinate reductase will pump the hydrogen cation around of the assisting plant. The cytochrome reductase will pass on the trace element. The last electron acceptor oxygen will receive the hydrogen for the bubbly H2O. The equation of adenine triphosphate is multiplied by 31 theoretical adenine triphosphate and divided by the Gibbs free energy of 2870 kilojoules to calculate the energy of the flourished plant. The refreshing glucose is used up to the 39 to 41% before storing the surplus of the rationed glucose. The final stage does involve the lactic acid fermentation of the reliable Gangamopteris. The proportional glucose will turn into the omnipotent pyruvate and repeat into the lactic acid lactate cycle of the stemmed plant. The lactate acid will disperse across of the gentle plant and the formed adenine triphosphate, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide hydrogenase and pyruvate will transform into the mastered acetaldehyde. The alcohol fermentation does evolve into the potent ethanol. The alcohol plus alcohol is important to develop into the concoctive yeast. The biological pteridophyta have grown on the inside of the big forests. The versatile ferns do reproduce by the fecundate spores. The magnate ferns do not shed the seeds or mate with the arable ferns. This fancy pulpodiacida do possess a complex leaf. The elegant leaf is called the divine magaphils. The unique blades of the earth's fern are found between the gargantuan stalk. The reinforced rachis is supporting the striving pinna and pinnules on the tenable plant. The curvy stem is made out of the benign cellulose. The sedimentary stem has an outer layer called the antipenetrable epidermis. On the inside of the still stem, there is the transporting phloem, non-specialized cambrium and delivering xylem. This yielding vascular bundle is providing the phosphorus other metal, potassium alkaline metal and nitrogen gas. The vessel passage of the dependable phloem does transport the hydrogen gas through the stiff plant stem. The water particles are passing into the hydrophobic bond on the inspirational stem. The fending cambium is responsible to manage the circumference of the tangible vessel tissue. The Herculean phloem will carry the food and the sustenant food does pass down to the hungry leaves. The water fluid does add a strength to the surgent and or suspicious xylem. The firm xylem is able to withstand the 9.8 newtons of the gravitational pull on the atmospheric pressure of the planet Earth for the pathway of the rich food. The segmental pericycle will circumscribe the formation of the lateral roots. The plant pericycle will continue to divide near the thick xylem. The plantipith is comprised of the softer parenchyma cells for the plant food. The interior cortex is filling the space of the interlocked stem for the support to the flexible stem. The space-filling cortex does add a storage of the drier starch too. Inside of the pistachio chlorophyll, there is the chachareuse stroma. The green stroma does possess the energy adenosine triphosphate product on the inside of the alpha plant. The chloroplast channels does fill the mantis leaf color. The thylakoids inventory are used to filter the electromagnetic photons for the light to pass through the reinforced lumen. The sticky fluid is stored on the inside of the Olympipteridophyta. In the statuesque plant, the bright light will strike onto the action potential of the resourceful plant. This busy action potential on the inside is known as the P680 site. The P680 action potential will pass the ultraviolet light and reduce the action center to the reduced state of the Pteridophyta flora. The aquaporin will split the water and the enzyme will release the electrons. The chemiosis will pump the electrons up and through the electron transport chain. The electrons will travel through the phaophyton to accept the electron for the phancylophyton. The highly occupied electron will transition through the December-going plastequinone for the separation of the mobility element. The 2,3-dimethyl-1,4-benzoquinone molecule is possessive of the 9-isopronyl unit branches. The multiplex cytochrome and BF pump will move the electrons to the urgent plastocinin. The registering plastocinin will regulate the electron before sending the electron to the P720 action center and going through a secondary electron transport chain to produce the hydrostatic energy. Inside of the plant cell, the protective nucleus does enzymatically control the internal deoxyribonucleic acid. The nucleus serology is surrounded by the nascent ribosomal ribonucleic acid being used to transcribe the genome for the life or death of the plantaRNA. The intrinsic nucleolus has a central role to communicate with the proteinaceous ribosome. The vital endoplasmic reticulum is used to produce the element calcium, create a protein synthesis and dissociate the lard lipids. Inside of the commingled chloroplast, the duality light is transitioned from the waves into the energy by a photosynthetic process called the electromagnetic photosynthesis by the plant plasm. The filtering perioxomes will use anabolism and catabolism on the inside of the metabolism of the solid phosphorus, nitrogen and potassium molecule. The beta oxidation mortification, glyoxylate conversion, barometer circumventing urate sulfite, assembling polyamine metabolism are responsible to control the biosynthesis of the microscopic photohormones. The hormone indole 3-acetic acid and jasmonic acid does add the phytadrenaline to the organic plant. The ribosomes will use the plant hormones for the production of the strong protein. The higher the hormones, there is more strength of the tamped protein. The vacuole removal will restrict the lethal CO2 for the fluid-filled organelle. The amyloplast site is in accordance with the starch biosynthesis storage of the resultant biproduct. The last of the plant components is the energetic mitochondria. The proactive mitochondria does create the energy to draw the trace elements for the cycles of the original fern. The equipped roots will add the support to the biological fern. The roots' specialized systems are fibrous for the biophysics of the natural phenomenal fern. The fibrous roots are stabilized by the solid rhizome. The rootstock will keep the plant in a vertical position on the lively earth. So the fern stratagem will continue to purify the vast atmosphere. The subtropical heat of the planet was approximately at the 17 degrees Celsius tab on the sensory thermoreceptors. The temperature measurement was consistent on the top of the core of the continent Pangaea. There was a slight rise in the light coccolithophore for the riveting earth. The coccolithophore root are abundant and classified as the eukaryote life on the tight globe. The stationary coccolithophore are a living organism which are residing on the inside of the thick soil. The vital coccolithophore are belonging to the class of Protista kingdom. The casual dicroidium have begun to spread on the earth crust. The coccolithophore are responsible for the creation of the many earthly plants. The eukaryotic Haptophyta have assigned the class Prime Neslephyceae. The unique coccolithophore are found across of the subtropical regions. The copious coccolithophore are the foundation of the sea's algae. The climatic weather has rapidly changed on the cyclic spin of the ample earth. The rising temperature was warming on the nourished earth, and the clean air was becoming humid on the inside of the exosphere and on the inside of the high sky. The blotchy Tetraxylopteris are classified under the piney gymnosperms. The conservative Cladoxylopsids have incorporated cross-breeding of the fern into the relative named Watiza. The trunk of the Watiza is a component of the classification into the long-living fauna. The big mammals are populating the spacious earth. The humble mammals have evolved from the nearly extinct lives of the precocious Theraspids. The Triassic era has lasted the 50,600,000 years on the planet Earth. The long Jurassic period has started with the Hitagian period, which does consist of the phylum Mollusca. The slime of the slugs and the goo of the snails are leaving their scum trails for the ground shell. The shifting mollusks would strut on the earth floor. The goopy Bellerofontida is an order of the globby snails. These sludgy snails do have an isotropic shell. The tough shell is coiled into a curvy spiral. The standard shape does have a trimeter being used to exhale the deathly CO2. The vented selenizone will act as a vent out of the thin shell. The gunky slug was able to squirm across of the earth layer. The goo of the slug would leave a scuff onto the accessible earth. The slimy gastropod did have a set of the bony teeth. The swift Calvopillosa crogeri would eat off of the sedimentary rocks. The lunging Calvopillosa crogeri would sense with the long tentacles. The dashing eyes were attached to the long stalks. The open mouth is made up with the assistant radula for eating the yummy vegetables, chewy algae, textured bark, savory fruit, chili leaves and health-giving grasses to feed the digestive system of the sticky snail. The prolific gonopore is found closer to the cool head for the reproduction of the myriad species. On the snail mantle, there is a perforated pneumostrome for the respiration through the extensible lungs. The dragging slug is in control of a skirt kneel ridge and the short foot. The short foot does permit the ability to squirm across of the earth's minerals. The one foot is using a strategy called the geophilomorpha momentum on the ingredient earth. The subclass ctenopods are free to be swimming across of the deep ends of the Navy Sea. The Sinemurian age has begun through the scientific record. The sweeping Sinemurian has commenced the rural region on the inside of the vast northern America. The thick-skinned mammals were appetized herbivores and starving insectivores spreading across of the flat terrain. The fury and ferocious Megazostrodon would jump from the tall trees. The arboreal mammal does remain limber while crossing through the tropic jungle. The nimble mammals were mostly marsupials which do undetectedly roam on the environment of the hospitable mammalian earth. The Megazostrodon fur is luminously lathered by the self-grooming of the pointy tongue. The enzymatic enos and lipase are used to help the growth of the healthy fur. The clean fur is also dragged through the lumpy tongue for removing any fur knots. The swiping tongue on the knots is able to untangle the scrunched fur coat. The Dinotherium triconidant relative does have the layer of fur to even the temperature between the 97 to 104 degrees. The warm temperature of the family are nocturnally behaving through handling the overall temperature of the internal organs. The warm mammal large brain is physically held inside of the cerebrospinal fluid. The heavy brain is made 25 times lighter by being surrounded by a coolant corticospinal aqua. The Sinemurian period has introduced the Tertian period to the energetic dinosaurs. During the Prosplintsbachian, the squiggly squids and eight-legged octopuses have roamed on the inside of their wavy sea. The Adaptation extinction period has occurred throughout the Bodacious Earth. Millions of years ago, the Jurassic era consisted of the low Jurassic scouring plight of the dangerous dinosaurs. The stacking rock formations have developed through the atmospheric pressure and severe temperature on the beloved Earth. The geological timeline has left a superposition on the inside of the lumpy and jammed layers. The weight of the Earth has added a pressure to the tough limestone. Over the years, the historic limestone was introduced to the geological pressure on top of the labrous stone. The many limestones was transforming by the exchange of the nitrogen, phosphorus and the other trace elements. The heavy pounds of the Earth during the Jurassic was sufficient to establish the formation of the forest marble. The Kilmaluagu forest marbles do locate through the Scotland, Europe. The heavy forest marbles were continuing to be viably discovered in the Upper Jurassic period through the Meotic Eon on the Indiad globe. The stable ground has sustained the fossilization of the athletic Anathan. The tough brachiopods were found throughout the flowing ocean. The rugged Cnidaria Teratopsis dornii are floating across of the salty ocean. The treading Medusa was swimming through the blue seas. The diving Medusa was sinking into the inside of the conditioned water. The impertinent jellyfish does support a rounded top. The epidermis pores does surround the apex of the electric jellyfish. The egg's umbrella dome is reinforcing the flotation of the buoyant jellyfish. The Mesoglora biomass is light in weight on the marine species. The splashing gastrodermis is protecting the gastric cavity. The radial canal and circular canal does lead into the flexible mouth and the perplex gonads on the slick jellyfish. The racing tentacles are reaching down from the apex of the wallowing Teratopsis dornii. The jellyfish tentacle does extend all the way into the oral arm. Underneath of the apex, there is an opening being known as the subumbrella body part. There are finge-like projections protruding from the skirt of the subumbrella section. The trance-like jellyfish Cnidaria does produce the piezoelectric polymer to emit electrical current from the half a dozen tentacles. The luminating Teratopsis dornii are able to illuminate through the bioluminescence by the subsuming photosynthesis energy through the electrolytic jellyfish. The sturdy Acanthodian was swimming on the inside of the blue ocean. The dainty Ichthyostoga were associated to the class Tetrapodomorphs. The scaly amphibian is four-legged and is covered in slime on the rough scales. The acrobatic Archaeognatha were crawling near the round puddles. The nimble Meganura are found flying near the beautiful estuaries. 163 million to 145 years ago had compressed the muck which is beginning to solidify into the usual Earth. The temperatures were hot, dry, humid, and subtropical on the inside of the heat waves of the Pangaea continent. The huge Stegosaurus ungulatus has lived 150 million years ago while navigating the Warriors forests. The grandiose Stegosaurus ungulatus was 20 meters long across of the segment of the lengthy body. The broad Stegosaurus ungulatus had a volume the size of a smothered peach pit for the conducive brain. The back plates are a warning to intimidate the carnivore dinosaurs. The Stegosaurus ungulatus tail has 3 feet long thagomizer spikes. The swinging tail is capable of puncturing the hunter's defensive scales. The Jurassic period did last 56 million years ago on the inside of the lionizing planet. The horrific reptilia have become present during the Jurassic cohort while conceiving onto the honorable Earth. The diacid historical lineage of ancestors have inheritable traits unique to the arching skull structure. The monophyletic diacids have all evolved over millions of years giving birth to the grouchy birds and crocodile clades. The genetic regeneration evolution has skeletal structures both by a relation within certain Archosaurinia and crocodile to relate to the one original diacid species. The diacid non-avian have descended archaic lineage into the variety of the havoc-wreaking specimen. The family Telosauridae and Metriarchinchidae are a taxonomic rank of the petrifying reptiles. There are the unconstrained plesiosaurs, wild pliosaurs, and mean marine Crocodylus porosus. All of the Earth's dinosaurs have developed from the predecessing ancestors of the loopy crocodiles. The local Pseudosuchia have shared a common characteristic and ego with the soaring aves. All of the birds have evolved synchronously with the deoxyribonucleic acid splicing of the mixed breeding of the Dinosauria species biargentologically. The marine crocodiles and the gentle birds do contain the same deoxyribonucleic acid. The spastic crocodile is the closest relative to the innocent birds on the inside of the vast cosmos. The analogous creatures do have a extol because of the vile crocodilamorphy reptiles. The Jurassic Eon to the Triassic epoch natural disaster has caused the evil extinction which has ended the lives of the hectic conodonts. The menacing conodonts have a skinny body with thin and small fins to swim as the linear predators. The various toothed conodonts are able to slither through the purple, blue, green and red living quarters of the coral reefs. On the inside of the savage ecosystem, the squishy conodonts did suffer the extinction on the earthly ocean. Today, the preservative archaeologists do engage into the rare findings of the toothed microfossils. The carousing archosaurian had huntingly snook into the sodium chloridic water. The angular Thalattosauria do insurgently prey on the perched Jabinia luanhara. The grinding crocodilomorph would clean the Enantianiv's thiles. The ground-impounding Giasaurini are suffering under the finicking matting season around of the sludge and mud. The hybrid crocodilians and wild archosaurs birds also have begun to disappear on the earth. The rhynchocephalian lizards Tuatara spenodon punctatus are close relatives to the squamata snakes and amphisbaenians. The hippoterosaurs were becoming temperamental and paranoid on the inside of the vertical sky. The Jurassic period had the heaving rift of the continental land for the continent Pangaea. The giant lithosphere and humongous asthenosphere were abruptly shifting on the inside of the Earth's mantle. The ecological epoch has ended 201 million years ago on the phenomenal Pangaea. The late Jurassic era was altering the evolution around of the world in the Oxfordian on the gentle Earth. The passing Kimmeridgian did begin the arrival of the humongous Brontosaurus excelsus. The high height of the Brontosaurus excelsus would weigh up to the 13 tons on the strong ground. Throughout the Sciathonian circa inside of the flat bottom ocean, the Chronosaur queenlandicus does swim across of the water enclosure. The Chronosaur queenlandicus is a 10-meter long fish with a total weight of 13 tons for the dear ocean. The Chronosaur queenlandicus is ocean subjugator. The advancing Tithonian had the appearances of the raunchy and taint Brachiosaurus altithorax around of the rare forests. The herbivore dinosaur would eat up to the 800 kilograms a day on top of the plentiful earth. The Cretaceous period's destiny has began the botany of the wide gymnosperms. The green coniferous and conifopter have drastically grown on the sacred earth. The biotic Cyclades and generic ginkgo biloba have spread over the firm earth. This period had become known as a warm period on the mortal earth. The terrified analogous creatures had ceased the growing of the calcified teeth. The avian birds have sought the refuge into the crowded forests. The fulpina trees have added a confidence to the precautious aves. The hesitant birds are less likely to leave the protection of the basil green forest, and the shrew birds' apathy of the unsecure open areas have reasonably begun the flocking packs within the basil green brush. The birds seeking cover and safety from the erratic cycle of life are regrouping the complete plans. The stealthy birds are relying on the defense of the woodlands, so the scared birds concerning evolution will reliably be confiding in the safe environment. The shielding forest is restoring temporary comfort to the nervous birds. The birds' nerves are solely temporarily going to protect the freaked out birds. The birds' concerning sense of security is threatened by the problem-solving predators. The convivial climate has changed the genuine nestle of the planet Earth water. The sea levels have rippled the changes on the top of the innate Earth. The temperament areas have dried the aqua sea, and the aquatic sea is resulting in the eustatic sea levels across of the Cerulean Ocean. The ocean biohydration is disqualitatively manipulating the sucking pressure on top of the raising rock habitat. The sea's refracting impact does compoundingly drain the hydroxyapatite minerals. The preservative compound is disintegrating into the less pure pieces. The smaller particles are demineralized or spread apart into the deep ocean. The solubility of the calcium carbonate does ascend with the ocean pressure and methane carbon dioxide passing through the ocean bedrock. The calcite precipitation is repetitively formed into the cohesive calcium isotope by multiple chemical transformations into the hard rock. Calcium dilapitates into the calcium-44 decay isotopes to dissolve coldly into a change of the temperament sea. The decreasing calcium levels are acoustic pressures on the shellfish and exoskeleton creatures. The missing quintessential essence of the coral reef is a less desirable lifetime home. The dried shelter reef is hardly long after the camaraderie departure of the blue ocean mortals. The ocean's resources are condemned and abandoned after the wilting ocean aqua bashing and autoionizing damaging trace element calcium-44 level demineralizing rock homes. The water's hydronium and H2O are entirely dependent on the transition of the hydroxide anion. The hydroxide cogent is slowly breaking more of the trace element calcium for the calcorination breakdown of the rock. The regulated calcium cycle is a regular event through the enfranchisation. The cool planet Berriasian, Valanginian, Hortorivian have passed on through the spinning Earth. The binomial Aptian and environmental Albion are showing the arrival of the pounding Sauroposeidon prattles. The foot-striking Somphospondyli will hatch from the impigmented egg. The monstrous Sauroposeidon would grow up to eat 1,150 pounds of the food per day on the nimble Earth. The Ornithischia dinosaurs would eat with the crowded herds. The Sauroposeidon group would have to walk across of the Earth for the discovery of the scrumptious vegetation. The kilometers squared would be browsed and ate by the undernourished and luxuriant herbivores across of the chunk of land. The men herbivores would have to walk across of the low carrying capacity of the green land for the desired food. The carrying capacity would be ate by the appetite of the large sauropods. Unfortunately, the square kilometers of the green lands are difficult to uncover on the subtropical Earth for the flower-blossoming magnolias, unique palms and tall sycamores. On the sycamore trees, the green leaf's chlorophyll is giving a green color and slowly breaking down the ripe ovate leaf. The green leaf will lose the damp hydration under the heat from the climate and turn into the purple palmate veins and cadmium yellow color. The oxygenated leaf is changing drastically into the orange carotenoids and the red anthocyaninous. The yellow leaf has transformed the molecular formula and developed the weaker carotenoids and crisp flavonoids. The ochre red is crumbling and covered into ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate. The terrible lizard sauropodomorph were forced to go on the long periods without the food or water to be able to unearth the surprising water, find the green trees or the covering shelter. After feeding dramatically, the gargantuan sauropod will drain ovate leafy fluid for the saturation of the palate. The viscous carbons will enter deeply into the digestive system, various veins and muscles. The daily 422,000 calories of leafy juices will pass by the absorptive digestive system veins and muscles into the filtering kidney. The kidney cortex is the outer layer and the kidney medulla is the inner layer during the distilling fluids. Each sauroposeidon prattle's kidney renal hilum is connected to the absorptive lymphatic system, sucked veins and uterus. The ready renal hilum is the size of the wide hilum for the connection to the structures used to bring the waste products. The portal system does consist of the two of the largest capillary beds. The afferent arteriole leads the blood away from the kidney and the afferent arteriole are surrounded by the loop of Henle because the red blood has to return to the pumping myocardium. Simultaneously, the pressing efferent vein inside of the inflating kidney is leading the blood away from the afferent vein and surrounds the contorted loop of Henle. The blood volume of the sauropod is low due to hardly any of the hard aerobic exercise while eating the herbaceous tree's leaf. The mixing osmolarity is higher to help retain the vascular leaf systems which is passing the liquid water. The kidney will filter the B products from the hydrostatic glomerulus and the areolar blood is capable of moving nutrition directly into the arching kidney. The healthy kidney is screening the oxygenated blood. The forceful nephrons are secreting the puissance hydrogen mixture of the low bases, high acids and unisex pH salt. The regulated secretion is using signaling hormones for the detection of which of the poly products should be filtered into the compact nephron. The large waste resin is passed into the proximal convoluted tubule. The absorbing post-convoluted tubule will subsum the 22 amino acids, water-soluble vitamins and the majority of the salts. The interstitium commands are passing an active transport into the vasa recta. The descending loop of Henle is on a 100-degree angle downward to the frequenting medulla. The H2O molecules are escaping into the passive transport for the blood reabsorption gradient. The hypertonic transition is preventative of the overhydration since the skimped water. The proximal convoluted tubule is absorbing and passing through the pumping system the dense calcium and sharp sodium. 70% of the sodium is intaken by the multiplex nephron for the started kidney. The loop of Henle will solely take in the clean water. The urea high pH will be pressing its way into the loop of Henle. The counter-current multiplier system is repelling the nephron water. The distal convoluted tubule exchange is responding to the aldosterone hormone. The collecting duct is the final concentration of the acidic urine. The sodium Potassium, magnesium and calcium will be vilely concentrated into the acidic urine. The juxtaglomerular cells will act in response to the heart's blood flow and blood pressure toward the congested renal. The profuse kidneys are energetically using the muscular lining known as the elastic detrusor muscle. The contractile detrusor muscle will apply a peritoneal cellular contraction into the two of the flexible sphincters. The mouth muscle is under a voluntary control whenever the 60-ton sauroposidon has the full bladder, and the stretch receptors will respond to the parasympathetic nervous system. The micturition reflex is indicative of the urinary sac. The urinary flow rate will be intentionally drained through the penis urethra. The early Cretaceous period did encounter the alpha dinosaurs on the Barremian numerical timeline. The Photinus pyralis is a flying insect. The bioluminescent insect had appeared during the 100 million years ago on the planet Earth. The tiny Photinus pyralis is capable of emitting the chemical C11H8N2O3S2. The electric firefly is able to harness the potent C11H8N2O3S2. The energy of the firefly is illuminating the core of the eerie insect. The trolling insect has the luciferin transferase power to illuminate on the elongated body. The lit-up firefly is using a chemical reaction to fuse the conducting elements. The enzyme luciferase to synthetically make the technical luciferin for the oxidized reaction. The Photinus pyralis stored chemicals in a chain reaction to enable the natural body's chemicals for the powerful molecule. Male fireflies do light up to show a passionate desire to mate out of a romantic flash of cold light. The firefly patterns of lighting are all personally spared by the light beams. The surmounting molecule will add a sufficient light to the insect for the pathway of the browsing insect and warn predators about a bitter taste. The creeping ammonoids are prominent on the slick sand. The grimy mollusks are living in a subclass of the slippery cephalopoda. The upper Cretaceous period have consisted of the changing Cenoman through the aging Earth. During the Cenoman circa, the accountable Ankylosaurini would roam onto the Earth strata. The wide core shape does add the perfect amount of weight to improve the stability of the jumbo Ankylosaurus magniventris. The trunk of the valiant Thyreophora is ensuring a sturdy stance to harness the omnipotent waging tail. The power source herbivore dinosaur has stern friction to output the bashing swings of a heavy tail. The agrist Ankylosaurus magniventris does control the dangerous caudal coccyx for the self-defense only. The Ankylosaurus magniventris will apply the speed to the maiming force of the tail club. The protector Ankylosaurus magniventris does possess a clover club-like tail for the frank defensive reptile. The center of gravity butt of the Ankylosaurus magniventris is wide enough to control the force across of the caudal tail for the ischemic bones of the grounded hindlimb. The flexible club tail of the armored dinosaur has a thick keratin to resist the whimpering. The connective keratin is protecting the dense bones and chic osteoderms on the caudal tail. The area leading to the tail club is called the handle on the 10-foot-long tail. The round knob is made up of the major osteoderms and minor osteoderms across of the bulging knob. The conservative force of the caudal tail is sufficient to break a shin bone. The caudal tail will output a total of the 4,800 C force used to mash a shin bone. The pompous tibia and sententious fibia may snap into pieces by the force of the bony Thyreophora club. The Turonian has established the carrying capacity onto the flawless earth. The scaly Pachycephalosaurus Wyomingenesis feet are using the foot strikes on the tanned sand. The Pachycephalosaurus Wyomingenesis fast-legged work is a multifarious stance is a rare skill of any species. The technique of the facultative feet is possible by the ischemic pelvis. The heat and energy are the source of reasoning to use the lizard's facultative bipedial and quadrite waist to express the hot centigrade. The gating walking is building a endurance to make contact in a collision with other walking Pachycephalosaurus Wyomingenesis. The need for speed and agility through evolution made multi-use muscles for the legs. The empowered legs are sensitive to the lactic acidic buildup and are interchangeable by the choice of the Pachycephalosaurus Wyomingenesis. The Pachycephalosaurus Wyomingenesis facultative feet do react to the 17-degree temperature through the heat waves on the gargantuan pangae for the head-butting Pachycephalosaurini. The Pachycephalosaurus Wyomingenesis are related to the Stygimoloch spinifer. The forward head-butting has bone fractures quaintly healing by the tamping calcium osteoclasts. The bone fragments after a hard hit on the weak brain periosteum layer is broken into the osteoblasts particles, and the osteoblast calcium cells are collected by the self-recovering defensive impulsus reaction of the live bone. The regenerating calcium will be continuously collecting the outlier bone particles and excess blood calcium to tamp down with the prompt osteoclasts for the error correction. The stygimoloch spinifer has a spiky surface on the stud covering and osteomyelitis bone infection from the head burting on other stygimoloch spinifer. The Archaeopteryx bird would fly over the ocean water. The Iberomosaurus aves are gliding across of the hard water. The philanthropic Turonian had raised the high Allosaurus fragilis. The Allosaurus fragilis was piffily feeding on the other dinosaurs, but the bold Fulgurotherium australe was solely eating the cloistered plants. The animal kingdom was a constant fight for survival across of the worrisome forests. The intense Beremian had the slither of the first snake. The preditive protosnake's Eophis underwoody accuracy is an ability that allows a maneuverable slither through the environments and has Dursley precision. The protosnake Eophis underwoody has a forked tongue, acts as two of the independent organs utilizing the smell on the two tips of the flapping tongue. The fixed distance apart does allow the thousands of olfactory receptors across each of the individual tips for the detection of different types of molecules. The sensitive response will integrate the concentration of the phlegmatic molecules. The forked tongue does absorb a varying environmental stimuli independently and simultaneously in each tip of the tongue. The protosnake's Eophis underwoody immune response is creating a mental representation its terpitudinal environment. The Eophis underwoody protosnake's prognostication is intensely reactive in reconnaissance to judge direction. The slithering Eophis underwoody protosnake does control the vertical pupil because the search to unearth the brain food. So the sly snake may plan to settle the eyes onto the fleek organism. The slit eyes will instill a intimidating fear into the surprised food. The scaly head has the tiny nostrils but developed sense detection through the olfactory nerve. The protosnake Eophis underwoody has a wide open jaw for swallowing the big eggs. The maxillary is holding the mygalomorphic fangs. The glottis void is a hollow tube for sucking in the dry air. The tongue sheath does protect the tongue and allow the swinging tongue to mobilely control the forked tongue. The long-bodied snake is round and possesses a lot of mobility through the flailing tail. The snake may lunge forward to strike down the curvaceous fangs. The weaving snake may also use the tail to wrap up a suffocating eupachiria. The swift tail is strong enough to stop the circulation of air and stop the breathing of the Proterosaurus. The snake may spin around in a 360 degrees while strangling its eupachiridae snack. Simultaneously, the snake will strangle and spin to affect the nervous system. The eupachiries controlling cerebellum, reserved myelencephalon, brainstem regulation, pons registration, nucleus accumbens slow breathing and medulla oblongata center of respiration. Periods of the archosauriform are causing a panting effect and frantic panicking autonomic nervous system. Inside of the cyclad forest, the strangling protosnake is freaking out the central nervous system. The central nervous system does signal the peripheral nervous system before the autonomic nervous system does relay the sensory neurons of the somatic nervous system to the low oxygenated brain. The struggling sensory neurons do pass through a drastic circuit and cause the neurons to fire the 70 microvolts. The fight or flight amygdala is encountering an immune response from the fear of the white light. The parasympathetic nervous system is prevented from regulating the breathing to a normal state of the internal organs. The system may not rest and digest the chemical and electrical reactions with the try to maintain a fully reacting brain. The sympathetic system is increasing the heart rate, blood delivery to help escape the danger through the tombstone courage of the scared eupachiria. The axon terminal is used for the dissociation of the electrical state to register with the other nerves. The neuronal function is an excited state to activate the meninnerves. The Viperidae assassin is aggressively asserting a strain onto the impropagated nerves. The stalk nerve is able to react better to the resting potential state through the cyclic onerous nerve. The festering neuron has to have a specific gradient of the sodium alkali metal and the alkali potassium across of the proctive nerve cell. The auxiliary axonal membrane has a diffusion of the Na and K into and out of the permeable membrane. The dry sodium must stay in a hypotonic sodium ratio through the axonal membrane. The potassium dosage is required to remain isotonic through the aximal membrane. The pumping nerves will diffuse the ions against of the gradient and create a negative charge on the interior of the aximal membrane. The excited neutron will have a depolarization to diffuse the sodium metal for the inside of the static cell body and electric axon at the border of the sinking joint. The inside of the electric axon will charge into a positively charged subatomic particle pathway through the thin pathway. The antic cell body's nucleus is a appendage storehouse on the inside of the electric soma. The energetic soma has electrical communication with the other nerve cells or the fibrous endoplasmic reticulum and bridging dendrite. The high energy will increase spontaneously to the peak of the electric charge of the electrically charged axon hillock. The regenerating repolarization will open the channels of the potassium for the departure of the K-positively charged axon. The excited state will begin to calm its electrical excited state through the firing nerve. The proliferated hyperpolarization of the nerves will go through a refractory period to stop the response to the servicing stimulus. The sodium channels will close the amphipratic membrane. The slow closing membranes will decrease the 70 microvolts. The 70 microvolts will enter into a hexagonic reaction and possess the fewer microvolts after the rush of the electric nerves. The local stimulus does pass through one section at a time on the electrostatic aximal membrane. Along the nerve there is a chain of the myolineal sheaths and Schwann cells for the prevention of crossing the electrical signal power of the message. The tempered myelinated sheath does enhance the speed of the electrical impulses across of the nerve tail. The processing oligodendrites does slow down the message and pass on the dire intel. The shocking node of Ranvier is found in between every cycle of the dynamic duo. After passing through the several cycles, the signaling electrical charge is found at the axon hillock for the entrance into the node of Ranvier. The junk node of Ranvier is a checkpoint between the oligodendrites. The many oligodendrites are slowing down the electrical signal across of the aximal pathway for the opposing end of the insulated nerve. The interactive oligodendrites do transfer the data from the other nerves and activate the remaining nerves for the escape of the already dangerous low oxygen levels of the eupachiria mammal brain. The rapid conduction of the eupachiria nerve cell is slowed and speed up across of the myelin sheath and nodes of Ranvier to arrive at a synaptic bouton. The nerve will engage in a neurotransmission in a chain of the impulsive electrical will exert the ecstatic neurotransmitter. The postsynaptic cleft space is allowing the exiting neurotransmitter. The possessive receptor is attributing the electric nerves. The multiple axons are bundled together to form the ethical tract. The erectopus nerves are disabling the respiratory tract for the oxygen. The further restriction on the trachea and the pulmons are reducing the oxygen atomic abundance to the eupachiria mammal. The low level of air is debilitating the nervous systems and reducing the power of the autonomic breathing system. The autonomic nervous system has too little oxygen to fuel the sensory neurons and nerves. Slowly, the brain's reaction is halting until the deactivation of the signaling into the lizard brain. The small organism's brain is inflamed because of the terror of the lack of wind. The brain is overheating rapidly and engaging in the excruciating palpitations before the encephalopathy is too stressful and the brain fails to run the eupichary 11 systems. The eupichary erectopus is lifeless and becomes the mouthful for the Eophis underwoody. The Turonian period did start the beginning of the deadly anoxic event through the deep ocean. The puissance hydrogen on the inside of the ocean has depleted of the oxygen atoms. The earthly oxygen is used to prevent the freezing Tethys Ocean to transform into the icy shield. The blue ocean's depth is known as the uncharted epipelagic while diving down into the ocean water. The depth is 0 to 200 meters deep on the inside of the blue ocean. The measured depth is referred to as the sunlight zone within the commensurable depth down into the inanimate ocean. The 0 to 200 meters is called the continental shelf descending into the darker water. The littoral mesopelagic zone is 200 to 1000 meters deep on the inside of the Tethys open water. The second depth is known as the twilight zone of the plain ocean. The second depth is called the mysterious continental slope out of the beach shore. The third depth is known as the grievous bathypelagic zone. The third layer has a depth of 1000 to 4000 meters on the inside of the Tethys bubbly partition. The depth is appreciated as the midnight zone. The fourth layer is known as the abstrous abyssopelagic zone. The depth in the fourth layer is 4000 to 6000 meters deep on the inside of the Tethys water. The layer is called the abyss while there is a flopping water. The running ocean level does have the continental rise aerating the swishing ocean. The recondite hydropelagic is the fifth depth on the inside of the Blue Sea Ocean. The hydropelagic zone quarters does have 6,000 to 11,000 meters across of the depth of the Soothing Ocean. The hydro water does have a hydraulic conductivity to pass through the bedrock, coral reefs and the stratigraphic earth. The measured depth is known as the Trenches Reef. The fifth depth is called the Ocean Lodging Basin. The rock bottom Marianas Trench is the final of the depths on the inside of the effervescent oceanic blue. The whole ocean's oxygen was reduced of the 31.08802 mass. The Atlantic and Pacific Ocean have created a linear quirk by the cute Holocene. Across of the boundary, the inside of the dark ocean has made a complementary color on the surface of the riveting water. The colder water at the bottom of the ocean is nearly impossible to survive by any of the surfacing crawling creatures. The depth weight of the ocean does decrease in temperature, oxygen and the creature's nutritious elements. The living activity is rare at the base of the ocean Marianas Trench. The low ocean has a strong current at the sand surface. The deepest layer water does travel at the 8.1 centimeters s to the exponent -1 measuring the drifting water. The water celerity is pushing a total of the 1.4 times 10 to the exponent 18 tons of the cerulean water. On the top of the sand pile, the gentle Nautilus bellonensis has gained a momentum on the ocean floor. The delicate Nautilus bellonensis does disperse the water for all of the directions across of the tetrahedral molecule. The open funnel will invoke the movement of the sea creature. With the funnel, the dignified Nautilus bellonensis is capable of moving in all of the directions of the ocean's perimeter. The coordinated hypnome is helping the navigation on the ocean sand. The organ valenciens does act as a secondary reproductive organ on the fertile Nautilus bellonensis. The oral lip is found around of the tight orbicularis oris. The lower beak will filter the small food. The circumscribed radula is able to control the mastication on the mighty jaw. The radular appendage will enable the soft Nautilus bellonensis for the filtering of the tiny food. The upper beak is a protective layer to conceal the small circumference of the fed alimentary canal. The upper mandibular muscle is aiding the constriction and expansion of the clenching jaw. The labial nerves are found adjacent to the robust mouth for the curvature of the special Nautilus bellonensis. The sensing rhinophore is accessing the pair of the chemoreceptors, so the fresh Nautilus bellonensis is capable of using the sense of taste in the surroundings on the skilled Nautilus bellonensis. The sensitive nerve ring is a highly sensitive area on the eco-friendly Nautilus bellonensis. The pristine oesophageal rings are used to accomplish the peristalsis on the contractile rings of the genus Nautilus bellonensis. The cephalic aorta and lesser aorta are on the opposing sides of the Nautilus bellonensis core. The crop of the voluptuous Nautilus bellonensis is found around of the tense abdominal cavity. The stomach intestines, cecum and anus are at the end quarter of the lovely Nautilus bellonensis. The sealed ovaries are found at the back of the radiant Nautilus bellonensis. The filtering liver is in front of the pericardial appendage. Renal sacs and gills on the diva Nautilus bellonensis. The pre- and post-ocular tentacles is locating at the back of the adorned shell. The ocular tentacles are used to detect the odors of the ocean battleground. The nidamental gland is used to secrete the fluids and deliver the eggs for the menstrual cycle of the high-yielding Nautilus bellonensis. The wavy Atlantic will not have a aquatic mixture with the Pacific on the inside of the volume of the liquid H2O. The ocean density has changed on the inside of the dense ocean. There are living organisms which are living on the ocean ground. The shifting hydrinoceros are scattered across of the earth floor. The bristly Phyllops are known to take up the sandy space. The taxonomic plants are unique in their size, shape and texture. During the larvae state, the Rhytius sponges are mobile on the warm sand, but the scratchy sponges will grow into a sessile organism and also attach firmly to the even ground. The jaggy sponges do consume the different bacteria, so the heterotrophic sponges will grow tall on the inside of the gigantic ocean. Whenever the environment is inhospitable, the cnidaria will turn into the gemmules to protect the flummox deoxyribonucleic acid for the resurrection of the parent sponge. The cool sponges may grow on top of the shaped rocks. The exuberant sponges do develop a different cellular anatomy on the inside of the gentle mesohyl. The mineral spicules are able to skimp the nutrients needed to grow on the underwater rocks. Some sponges are carnivorous and the food does consist of the small crustaceans. The fossilized archaeocyathids are stored on the surface of the wet rocks. The imprinting fossils do belong to the dazzling sponges. The washing Paleotethys and Tethys ocean are connected in between the slick water, yet the water dynamics are similar to the aquatic organisms for the perception of the spherical orbiculars oculi. The decadent oceans are covering 70% of the life forms Earth. The crustacean period did contain the reverb-incarnation on the giant Earth. On the throbbing Santonian tectonic plates, the species of dinosaurs have genetically changed through mating on the aerodynamic Earth. The fidgeting Phedralosaurus ilocensis is meat-eating as a carnivorous dinosaur. The twiddling Phedralosaurus ilocensis is threatening the lives of the other spooky dinosaurs. The munching Phedralosaurus ilocensis does have a diet to eat the other dinosaurs. The scavenging Phedralosaurus ilocensis is consuming the healthy herbivores. The conscientious herbivores do have a lot of plants for their delectable diet. The stern herbivores and the grunting herbivores are made up of a stronger glycosidic bond and mighty connective tissue on the inside of the skeletal muscular system. The tasty herbivores are providing a lot more of the nutrients and minerals required to become big and strong as a ravenous dinosaur. The Phedralosaurus ilocensis gums does eat the yummy glucose 6-phosphate tasty 1,3-diphosphoglycerate, delectable 3-phosphoglycerate, garnishing 2-phosphoglycerate and the succulent fructose 6-bisphosphate of the fructose and the fructose 1,6-bisphosphate during the meal of an unsuspecting herbivore. The glucose molecule is used on the inside of the connective tissue for the glycosidic bond. The aliphatic ring is enhancing the muscular system for the strength of the terrible lizard muscle. The acetyl-CoA fluidity is a sugary substituent used to bond the muscle tissue. The monosaccharoid sugar will connect to the other sugars for the formation of the polysaccharide sugar. The acetylcholine transferase is an endangering enzyme. The acetylcholine transferase will synthesize the liquid acetylcholine, so the production of the impulsive neurotransmitter will enhance the polypeptide bond in the fight or flight stemming from the amygdala catecholamines. The tough polypeptide are thousands of peptides being linked into the protein chain. Once the strong polypeptide is formed, the driven peptide will take on the form of the connective tissue. The raw protein does differentiate into the messy enzymes, moist hormones, occupied membrane pores and magnate receptors, meanwhile receiving a chemical stimuli from the procedure of the circadian rhythm on the inside of the athletic dinosaur, so the antsy dinosaur may chew through the herbivore meat. The tested skeletal muscle is a expandable tissue holding the muscle fascicle. The braced muscle fascicle does turn into the muscle fiber. The fluid myosin will produce the thick contractile filaments and the soaking myosin will establish the small contractile filament within the mite of the defensive sarcoplasmic reticulum. The energetic mitochondria are located throughout the surface of the sinewy muscle fiber. The strong muscle will pull in an asymmetrical way on the mighty muscle. The agonist and antagonistic muscle contraction will be able to move the four extremities. The repairable plants do possess more of the healing mitochondria. The bleak herbivores are being targeted because the greater meat for the bulking Phedralosaurus ilocensis. The dry mass of the Phedralosaurus ilocensis does have the 18.5% carbon and 3.3% nitrogen. The Ornithomimus velux archithermal while becoming appetized through the craving theropod pack. The Ornithomimum velux 69.2018 km/h is a skill for the tactical hunter. The Coelurosaur ornithomimes velux have edentulous physical traits on as a cranky dinosaur. The Gallimimus bullatus R is the largest of the ornithomimides velux grumps. Gallimimus bullatus top speed is in the mid 50 km/h in a timing sprint through the ecology shelter. The companion course was the age of the stomping T-Rex. The trampling T-Rex has lived 75 million years ago on the top of the terra firms. The horrendous T-Rex have experienced the phenomenal growth spurts in the state of the Earth's animal kingdom. The dreadful T-Rex at age 14. The shocking T-Rex would gain 600 kilograms over the next 4 years in the holistic weight of the bilateral symmetrical shape of the magnanimous body. The anarchic T-Rex is known as the disorderly Monospondylus gigas because of the thighs, and the rampant Tyrannosaurus rex is more dangerous if an adult girl. The retro companion did have the reasonable Triceratops horridus too. The defensive Triceratops horridus was avidly found in the subtle sites of the vast North America. The friendly Triceratops horridus have lived 60 million years ago on the saturated grass. The benevolent Triceratops horridus did not have any of the curvy teeth. The saintly Triceratops horridus could aggressively go on the defensive attack against of the gigantic predators. The horrifying Tyrannosaurus rex is an inadequate match with the benevolent Triceratops horridus. The harmful Tyrannosaurus rex has a large jaw and powerful legs. The dangerous Tyrannosaurus rex is disregarding the strength of the kind Triceratops horridus. The easygoing Triceratops horridus does possess a ball joint for the fragile neck. The gentle Triceratops horridus is able to protect the main arteries because the 5-inch frill. The tactical Triceratops horridus has the modular strength emitted immensely from the biodefensive epicipitial studs. The stable 3.4 metric ton ceratopsian does possess a lot of weight on the intimidating 1.4 metric ton head. Combined on the heavy-duty neurocranium and hard-wearing visceracranium, there are the 3 horns made of a strong keratin. The civil Triceratops horridus and antagonist Tyrannosaurus rex do fight on the inside of the forest space. The conical horn of the defensive Triceratops horridus is susceptible to be bit by the gritty Tyrannosaurus rex. At the top of the Tyrannosaurus rex zygomatic major, there are the forceful nares to inhale the air into the powerful olfactory bulb. The amok Tyrannosaurus rex has highly developed the sense of smell through the nosis ala. The equipped nose is able to distinguish the surrounding victims across of any hungry setting. The potent fragrances are brought into the olfactory bulb and able to make a visuospatial skill enhancement into the imagination of the screwball T-Rex. The attacking Tyrannosaurus is able to visualize and plan a executed attack on its weak prey. The Tyrannosaurus maxillary fenestra is a other spacious area present on the front of the dense skull. The antorbital fenestra is a larger hole through the upper jaw. The bony orbit is a gaping hole used to fill with the muscular eyeball. The T-Rex infratemporal fenestra is situated at the temporal lobe stitched together by the squamous stitching to the flat sphenoid bone. At the base of the jaw, there is a partition on the aerodynamic jaw being utilized strategically to bite down long and hard. The monospondylus gigas serrangular foramen is able to add the dynamics to the lower jaw. The 8,000 pound per square inch model jaw of the Hippotyrannosaurus rex is not a match to fight with the calm Triceratops horridus. The entire Tyrannosaurus rex biomechanics are boosting 8.5 tons and the 1.133 metric ton masticating jaw. The horns of the genuine ceratopsian Triceratops horridus do get bit by the horrible Tyrannosaurus rex and clenched on the inside of the massive jaw. The Newton's force of the bite is not strong enough to hold the weight and acceleration of the independent Triceratops horridus head. The crest horn will add too much of the pressure on the Tyrannosaur mandible. The weaponized horn will slip out of the vicious Tyrannosaurus rex's mouth and the horn of the brilliant Triceratops horridus horn will puncture the gunky eye or the bloody heart of the Saurischian therapsid known as the elusive Monospondylus gigas. The sharp Triceratops horridus ceratops horn will either blind or kill the devious Tyrannosaurus rex. The Campanian phase is known because of the eye-opening birth of the chaotic Velociraptor mongolensis. The haywire Velociraptor mongolensis has lived up to 75 million years ago on the 360-degree Earth. The frenzied Velociraptor mongolensis is referred to as an uncontrollable dromaeosauridae. The frantic Velociraptor mongolensis is classified as a dangerous theropod. The hyperactive Velociraptor is symmetrically enact as a bipedal Saurischian through the index of the dromosaurid dinosaurs. The monoecious Velociraptor mongolensis has been found in forestry Canada, grassus antarctica and sunny South America. The figure of the carnivorous Velociraptor is known as the 33-pound dinosaur. The Velociraptor mongolensis sclera bone is a bone ring found on the inside of the collagen eye. The round eye bone is a 360-degree circle and does hold sacrally on the inside of the eye socket for the vitreous eye. The dodging eyes are fixated on the pure eggs. This unique Velociraptor mongolensis has prowled into the birthing place to raise the primitive development of the encapsulated dinosaurs. The Velociraptor mongolensis does lunge to quickly rummage the bare open nest. The grasping hands are holding tightly on the exuberant egg. The stealthy Velociraptor mongolensis is a higher achiever and has exponentially wise intellect under the pressure of the audacious habitat. The Velociraptor mongolensis dinosaur has an encephalization quotient of 5.8 opposed to the average 1.83 on a scale of the 10 dinosauria intelligent quotient of the contemporaneous terrible reptiles. The rushing Velociraptor mongolensis does possess a safe ungual claw for holding onto the terrible reptile eggs. The Velociraptor mongolensis sickle-shaped claw is attached to a distal and proximal phalanx through the modified claw. The weaponized claw may be used in a fight with one of the sharpest claws. The fast-moving Velociraptor mongolensis does quickly snatch an egg. The raptorial hands are inact as a dangerous trait of the sneaking dinosaur. The Velociraptor mongolensis has a brawn mass of 33 lbs and a maximum acceleration of 40 km/h, using meters per second. The Velociraptor mongolensis 33 lbs times 0.56 of a meter 1320 units of force. The Velociraptor mongolensis on top of 2.43-foot rock has an optimal angle to jump at 34 degrees. The speedy Velociraptor egg thief does dash forward and hop 10.07 feet above the stationed rock. The pouncing Velociraptor mongolensis 12.5-foot jump has a Newton's gravitational pull of 9.8 meters per second as Newton's law of gravity on the planet Earth. The maximum height is reached at 10.07 feet high into the thin air. The maximum distance traveled with the exact angle at top speed is 91 feet through the agro-chartreuse green forest. The abrupt landing is easier by the unique foot of the brisk plunderer. The egg thief does land sapidly to run with a turbo velocity on the arched feet. The nest-robbing dinosaur has sprinted through the leaf-covering forest. In the Cretaceous period, the climactic Campanian mass extinction has occurred on the sage of the hospitable Earth. The Gorgonopsids neromines are associated as the sojourning tyrannosaurids. Shortly after, there is a global demise of the dinosaurs. Hypocritical plesiosaurs capture smaller Dallosaurus ternerii and larger Manosaur hoffmanii, so all condemnatory unknown species bag and dying on the huge Earth. The aquatic life could not survive on the embodiment of the savored Earth. The diving Elasmosaurus has a flat tail, long neck and pelvic girdle for floating. The 2 metric ton Sauropterygia is 7 meters long and mostly elongated at the stern metaclastoid muscle, anterior triangle of neck and myoid muscle. The Elasmosaurus does use the paddle and flipper limbs. The tooth-bearing Elasmosauridae uniquely has sharp teeth held by the premaxilla of the upper jaw. The fisher Elasmosaurus does eat the small marine animal and medium fish through the ocean home, while consuming the marine species. The disregarding Elasmosaurus is susceptible to swallow the gastroliths on the inside of the strong stomach. The swallowed stones do help to sink lower through the Tethys Ocean for the hunt of the living food. The splashing echinodermata are flowing with the current of the vulnerable ocean. The 5-mile-per-hour waves of the ocean do move the radial symmetrical sea star and continue to push the bilateral symmetrical Ederosteroidae as a full-grown adult. The starfish has a total of 5 points for preying on the damp clams, watery oysters and aquatic corals. The echinoderm is a heterotrophic organism. Sea stars may regenerate a lost limb after being bit or torn on a leg. The epimorphic sea star does give birth knowing the ability to regrow a torn limb. The deuterostome sea stars are relaxed on the Tethys Ocean bottom. The squirming amniotes have vanished in the fight of survival of the Devonian period through the exceptional planet. The first plants on the Earth were active as seedless non-vascular on the inside of the plant botany. The Campanian circa does have the first adaptations of the new plant life. The seed-bearing plants have spewed the sporophytes onto the fertile Earth. The flaying arthropods are emphasized as the sweeping crustaceans. In the ocean and land, the staggering arthropod do have the defensive mechanism known as the calcified exoskeleton. The living organisms have begun to populate and embark on the bizarre Earth. The lurking arthropods have formed the Euarthropoda phylum. The types of flimsy centipedes are the teasing Scolopendromorpha, taunting Scutogyromorpha and the heckling Lithobius forficatus. The poisonous centipedes will secrete thoroughly a paralyzing basiquinone for the noxious state of the unforeseen prey. These cringeful arthropods may resort to the corporrhagi for the survival on top of the mystifying Earth. The blood-curdling exopoda will eat their own defecation and fecal matter to survive on the dry soil. The bone-chilling centipedes are able to use a natural phenomenon called the sclerotized defense while growing in the size of the open pores. The extension of the squiggly centipedes will scare away the offensive predators. The antenna is located on the head for the detection of the terrorizing predators. The flat head skull is concealed by a hard shell. The back of the myriapods is composed of the buckling tergites for the movement on top of the earth crust. The hectic millipedes do include the Eumillipes Persephone. The manic Eurypterid are associated to the types of the attacking scorpions. The buzzing Eurypterid is separated into the post-cephalic appendage of the brisk scorpion. The vibrant scorpion head does possess the clamping chelicerae for holding the nutritious food. The maneuverable pedipalp are the tenseful clamps used by the brisk scorpion for the defense of the rescinding predators. The murderous scorpion head and body are separated by the ready cox apophysis. All set carapace. and prepared sternum possessing the reproductive area at the front of the killer scorpion. The tempting basil piece and initiating pectines are in front of the spread spiracle and sprawled sternum on the slayer scorpion. The caudal area is used on the inside of the long spine. The scorpion's caudal tail does have the excretory anus, bent vesticle and spicia culeus. The furious centipedes do slide across of the solid rocks, sticky muck and grudgy algae. There are alarming insects and hair-raising arachnids found on the orbiting Earth. The gunky parasitic insects do have a paralysis effect of the loitering arachnids and frantic myriapods being found on the twirling Earth, but the risky arachnids do have the lethal neurotoxin too. The first spider was low creeping on the cerebral Earth. The nerve-wracking Atercopus fimbriungus is associated to the order of the spooky Uraraniida. The eerie Atercopus fimbriungus did produce a neurotoxin. The poisonous neurotoxin is secreted through the sharp fangs. The angular fangs of the spider are malgillomorphy on the front of the mouth's chelicerae. The disguising gnathochelarium are concealing the arching fangs. The mobile eyes of the spider are able to use the ocellus viscin above of the connective cephalothorax for the triangulated release of the deathly toxin. The linking cephalothorax does separate the head from the torso on the fearsome Atercopus fimbriungus. Inside of the strapping cephalothorax, there is a poison gland. The dangerous poison is made up of the chemical substances. The neurotoxic substituents are aminoproteins, enzyme peptides, sweet sugars and the other compounds through the heterogeneous mixture of the inoculating neurotoxin. The secreted venom is produced of the high amounts of reactive non-metal carbon, nitrogen, the gaseous hydrogen and oxygen on the inside of the spider, yet also there is a low dose of the terminal reactive non-metal sulfur. These elements are lethal to the prey. The sulfuric venom does pass through the poison duct and the venom does exit the skewed fang. The torso is covered in the short hair. The fovea roundness does have a rough hair. The rough hair has the involvement with the chromosome 6 and 19 and the 7 and 17 on the autosomes. The creepy Atercopus fimbriungus does have the 19th and the 6th chromosome possessing the luteinizing hormone on the honed Atercopus fimbriungus. The follicle-stimulating hormone is also found on the 6th chromosome. The split hair does depend on the secretions involving the proteinous collagen, conditioning luteinizing hormone and teasing follicle-stimulating hormone on the autosomal chromosomes. The forestry spider does have the 8 of the long legs. The bending legs do have a femur and tibia on the round leg. The legs trichobothria do support the heavy body. The stable metatarsus, tarsus and the tarsal claws are found on the immoral spider. At the end of the opisthothely, there are a folded sheet of the cuticles for the silk gland openings. The sheet of cuticle silk glands are used to release the proteinaceous silk. The moist proteinaceous silk is oxidized by the drier air. The more oxygen atoms will attach to the bound silk. The bond does become strong and support the weight of the stepping Atercopus fimbriungus. The fowl spider does have an exoskeleton, so the core of the spider is stronger than the vertebrate life forms. The tracking Atercopus fimbriungus is enabled to use a tactic to inebriate the careless prey. The tough strategy is called the aposematic scolopendra to the taxonomist researcher. The spider's activity will mimic the syncoping prey. The free spider does prey onto the smaller insects. The tiny Celiardida will become lured into the octagon web. The jumping plantlice are unaware of the arachnida web. There are slithering millipedes and wriggly centipedes which are crawling onto the motionless soil. The engaged centipedes are able to use a natural phenomenon called the sclerotized defense while growing in size of the elastic pores. The extension of the centipedes will scare away the peril predators. The cylindrical antenna is located on the head for the detection of the predators. The head is made of a hard shell. The back of the myriapods is composed of the interfolding tergites for the movement on the earth crust. The armored tergites do overlap on the surface of the scolopendra subspinates mutilans. The toxic benzoquinone is able to inebriate the disregarding predator. The scavenging scolopendra subspinates mutilans are secreting a paralytic neurotoxin and able to poison a predator by the cinch bite onto the raw flesh. The slight contact with the dewy scolopendra subspinates mutilans will cause the drizzled benzoquinone to strike paralysis onto the reckless predator. The millipedes clade do include the Eumillipes Persephone. The rummaging Eumillipes Persephone does crawl across of the holy earth. The group myriapods do contain the 16,000 species on the inside of the organism's index. The mammals Alambdolist's grangery is a hunting as an insectivore creature. The rummaging animal does seek out the scraggling bugs. The last period of the Mesozoic is the reticent Maastricht. During the vital Maastricht, the humane Parasaurolophus would show the compassion as a terrible lizard. The lovable Parasaurolophus is an elegant dinosaur. The voluptuous reptile is a delicate dinosaur because of the royal crown, but the regal crown is fragile on the head of the divine Parasaurolophus. The gorgeous Parasaurolophus does possess the hollow crown. The adorable Parasaurolophus crown is only 1.5 inches or 2 inches thick on the noble head. The vegetarian Psittacosaurus is located in the base of Asia. The male Deinonychus antihippus does control the erection while pursuing a beautiful female. In the reproduction of the Deinonychus antihippus dinosaur life, the cells do have to encounter each other in the reproductive systems. Inside of the male Deinonychus antihippus, the deoxyribonucleic acid does roam on the inside of the neurocranium, the gonads and the bones on the inside of the male dinosaur, yet the kidneys do have a role in producing the antidiuretic hormone. The vasopressin is used to stimulate the barometer on the inside of the blood capillaries, vessels, arterioles and arteries responsible to perform a cycle on the inside of the circulatory vascular system. The Deinonychus antihippus dinosaur body does go through a negative feedback loop. The hypothalamus does contain the pituitary stalk. There is the testosterone to improve the catecholamines. The testosterone will boost the adrenaline and noradrenaline on the inside of the brain. There is the adenohyphysis and the neuropophysis which are in control of the secretions into the bloodstream. The testosterone will pass through the membrane. The testosterone will be manipulating itself through the way of the membrane. The permeable membrane will use the active transport to penetrate the membranous wall. The membrane is amphiprodically structured to function on the inside of the endocrine system. The hormone will be going through the palmar flow on the inside of the bloodstream. The extracellular fluid will help push the 55% of the red blood cells and 45% plasma on the inside of the vessels. The blood vessels will collect the nutrients, minerals and vitamins. The plasma will assist in bringing the sodium bicarbonate, chlorine and H2O across of the body, so the organs will conjunct the products. The compiled products will react to their excretory faces on the inside of the body. Simultaneously, the brain will release the cortisol and cortisone osmosotically through the pituitary gland. The cortisol is used to regulate the osmolarity on the inside of the circulatory vascular system. The fluid balance is controlling the water, plasma fluid, leukocytes, sodium, potassium and calcium effectively to promote the full potential of the Deinonychus antihippus dinosaur. The cortisol does aid in maintaining the body temperature on the inside of the Deinonychus antihippus dinosaur. The cortisol will reduce the inflammation in the blood vessels, skeletal tissue and epithelial. The reduction of the 4,500 to the 11,000 leukocytes per microliter will allow the blood to pass thoroughly through the valves of the blood vessel. Coincidentally, the prolactin is located on the inside of the pituitary gland. The prolactin is a hormone which does arouse the mammillary glands. The system of the Deinonychus antihippus dinosaur. There is an endocrine hormone which will signal the arousal in the Deinonychus antihippus dinosaur. The arousal will activate the limbic system. There will be an omnipotent force to add compassion to the arousal of the male. The cerebrum will receive the sensory neurons, and the sensory neurons will orbit to the area. The skeletal muscle is tense in the state of the myocytes. The brain will produce the acetylcholine. The sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems are using the fight or flight and the rest and digest stages in the intimate act in the rearing position during the coitus shifts. The acetylcholine is created as a neurotransmitter to expose itself to the swelled area on the inside of the penile erection. The acetylcholine will continue to further contract the urethra. The vasopressin will reduce the hemoglobin size. Consecutive flow of the red blood cells and white blood cells on the inside of the Deinonychus antihippus dinosaur. The sensory neurons will relay the information to the cerebrum. The acetylcholine will create a firm antagonistic and agonistic contraction on the inside of the sex organ. The male genitalia is created from the somatic tissue. The somatic tissue is exposing the plethora of the fibrillin, so the glycoprotein will support the evolution of the elastin. The ELN gene will release the constituents tripolastin for the elastin to implement the activity as a elastic protein. The elastin is able to flex and stretch to erect the dick. The cortisol will enable the incline angle of the dick. Depending on how much onychotic pressure is in the Deinonychus antihippus, the dick will be erected to a horizontal and vertical angle at the pelvis. The osmolarity and viscosity will create an acute angle within the cock. The skeletal muscle is a expandable tissue holding the muscle fascicle. The muscle fascicle does turn into the muscle fiber. The myosin will produce the thick contractile filaments and the myosin will establish the small contractile filament on the inside of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The mitochondria are located throughout the surface of the muscle fiber. The acetylcholine is a combination of the acetyl-CoA and acetylcholine transferase on the inside of the Deinonychus antihippus dinosaur. The glucose C6H12O6 is working to create a glycosidic bond on the inside of the muscle tissue. The monosaccharoid will connect to the other sugars for the formation of the polysaccharide. The acetylcholine transferase is an enzyme. The acetylcholine transferase will synthesize the acetylcholine, so the production of the neurotransmitter will enhance the polypeptide bond in the fight or flight stemming from the amygdala. The polypeptide are thousands of peptides being linked into the protein chain. Once the polypeptide is formed, the peptide will take on the form of the connective tissue. The protein does differentiate into the enzymes, hormones, membrane pores and receptors while receiving a chemical stimuli from the procedure of the circadian rhythm on the inside of the Deinonychus. The cortisol and cortisone is improving the vasometer during the exocrine into the tunica intima, tunica media, tunica adventia, endothelium and smooth muscle through the penis. The steroid is passed through the limbic system via the circulatory vascular system. In the kidney, there is an adrenal cortex. The adrenal cortex is responsible to produce the cortisol. The kidneys do contain a uric acid NH2. The kidneys do have a role in the excretory system. The retinal cortex does secrete a hormone into the bloodstream. The blood will travel through the efferent vein. The glomerulus will take the blood to the inside of the Bowman's capsule. The cortisol will secrete into the capillary bed. The Bowman's capsule is the most occupied group of the capillaries. The cortisol will travel through the system and the hormones will strengthen the arousal of the reproductive system. The pancreas does create the HCO3. The HCO3 is continuously produced while consuming the acid and base while being sent into the pancreas. The reproductive system of the male and female are pertaining to the deoxyribonucleic acid and ribonucleic acid on the inside of the DNA. The proteins we are eating are contributing to the total 100% of DNA and RNA requiring to create an offspring. The deoxyribonucleic acid is coming from the brain and the testicles to produce the alpha sperm. The essential compounds are the guanine and adenosine which do associate as the purines, and the purines will match with the uracil, thiamine and cytosine pyridamines. The nutrients we do consume will bring a higher percentage of the certain nucleic acid. The balance does have to be 100% to form on the inside of the male reproductive system. Yet the body will always find a way to give the 100% of the necessary components to form an offspring, although the proteins and sugars are the backbones. So there is the order of operation to establish the nucleic acids. The hormones all do travel to initialize the function of the somatosensory on the inside of the reproductive organs. In the males, the testicles will begin to have a sexual arousal on the inside of the testicles, and the correct amount of adrenaline will perk up the testicles and erect the dick during the congress hedonism across of the male reproductive system. The spermatozoa do begin to become exhilarated on the inside of the testicular sac. The spermatozoid will start to transition into the tightly coiled seminiferous tubules. The sperm does become nourished by the Sertoli cells. The androgens are locating on the inside of the testicles. The testicles are preparing the sperm for the development in the 2 to 4 degree temperature of the testicular sac. The jizz will travel through the epididymis, so the flagella will gain the motility on the inside of the male reproductive system. The androgens do liberate on the inside of the gonads. The hormones and deoxyribonucleic acid and ribonucleic acid are secreted into the scrotum. The DNA and RNA are polynucleotides. The information is stored on the inside of the jizz. The proteins and sugars are expedients to relay the pleasure on the inside of the Deinonychus antihippus. The long chains of nucleic acid are containing the 100% of the genetic code G, A, U, T and C on the inside of the ejaculatory fluid. There are cell mutations which are occurring on the inside of the Deinonychus antihippus dinosaur. The proteins are going through a synthesis on the inside of the testicles. There has to be a hydroxide to bond the nucleic acids into the long chains. There are 5' ticks. The 5' tick will contain a phosphate before attaching to the 3' tick and host a nitrogen-containing base. The phosphodiester bond will form in between the 5' tick of the nucleic acid and the 3' tick of a nucleic acid. The phosphodiester bond will have a hydrogen bond on the inside of the helix. The hydrogen bond will be established to the 2 or 3 times during the hydrogen bondings in the sugary backbone of the chain. The deoxyribonucleic acid has a 2' ticked hydroxyl. The double strand does contain either A, T, C or G at the center of the DNA. The ribonucleic acid does have a 2' ticked hydroxyl, but will contain the A, U, C and G at the center of the DNA. The hydrogen bonding will leave a residue in the molecular genetics of the nucleotides. The strands do form an antiparallel form on the helix. The one strand is going from the start to the back and the other strand is facing the opposite end of the strand. Yet the strands are both read from the 5' tick to the 3' tick direction on the strand. The distance in between the antiparallel DNA will not be changed on the inside of the replication cycle. There is a selective combination throughout the bonding of the pyrimidines and purines on the inside of the DNA and RNA of a human. If there are 2 purines, the shape will widen on the inside of the structural gene. If there are 2 pyridamines, the form will narrow on the inside of the structural strand. The adenine will repel the formation with a cytosine. The van der Waals force will take place on the inside of the double helix. The phosphate is on the outside of the double helix. The phosphate does secure an exterior wall. The strand is going from the 5' tick and reading to the 3' tick, but the other strand is laying antiparallel on the inside of the helix. The phosphate is forming the exterior of the double helix and the one strand is holding the nucleic acid, but the other strand has a phosphate on the outside of the double helix too. The nucleic acid is meeting in the center of the beta and alpha helices, so the opposite strand will present the 3' tick to the 5' tick. The hydrogenase will occur in between the nucleic acids, so the 5' tick will attach to the 3' tick on the inside of the molecular genetic. The spiraling strands are creating a double helix. The nucleotide is a combination of the ribo C5H10O5 plus the sugar as the nucleic acid and B2 base on the inside of the strand, and the nucleoside is a conjunction of the base plus ribose plus phosphate on the outside of the deoxyribonucleic acid. The deoxyribose is enforcing the mite on the inside of the deoxyribonucleic acid. The deoxyribonucleic acid will start to have an enzyme appear on the strand. The gyrase will begin to bind to the double helix on the inside of the genetic molecular wind intertwined into the strand. The gyrase is a restrictive enzyme. The gyrase will be attached to the DNA and RNA on the inside of the strands. The gyrase does bind to where the 100 to 200 base pairs will start ahead of the separation of the 2 strands. The promoters will aid in separating the strands. At the 100 to 200 base pairs, the gyrase will uncoil the strands. The helicase will enable the coil to release a helicase on the inside of the DNA and RNA through the molecular structure. The helicase will annihilate the hydrogen bonding on the inside of the molecular structure, so the double helix will unfold on the inside of the strand. The initiation will permanently prevent the opening from closing at the start of the replication fork. The initiation will enhance the polymerase activity while using the thiamine and adenine bases on the inside of the deoxyribonucleic acid strand. The omnipotent element is remaining the Tata box. The initiator protein will be directed to the replication fork. The replication fork will open up across of the strands. The initiator protein will enable a defense on the strand. The single-stranded binding proteins will seal the opening on the molecular structure, so the replication fork will remain open on the inside of the helix. The replication fork is sending the 5' tick to the 3' tick on the top of the strand, and there is the anti-parallel strand which is sending the 5' tick to 3' tick on the opposite side of the replication fork. The polymerase 3 will have a role in creating the strand structure. The code on the one strand will be exchanged with the purines and pyridamines on the inside of the strands. The adenosine will change to thymine or the guanine before the alteration of the cytosine. Yet the strands are the exact opposite of each other on the molecular structure. The ribonucleic acid primase will lay the ribonucleic acid primers. The primers are replaced on the inside of the replication bubble. The primase are 10 base pairs long on the inside of the ribonucleic acid. The stretches of the deoxyribonucleic acid are providing the polymerase 2 to the starting phase ion the inside the bound organism. The initiation does force the deoxyribonucleic primers to replace the deoxyribonucleic acid with the deoxyribonucleic acid primers. The replication fork will begin to create the replication bubble. This is the phase known as elongation on the inside of the reproductive cycle of the Deinonychus antihopus dinosaur. The ligase does create the phosphodiester bond on the inside of the replication bubble. The strands are beginning to copy the opposing strands and replace the unnecessary nucleic acids with the correct genetic code for the genome. The genetic code is allowing the presence of the introns and exonerating the introns on the strand. The introns are junk deoxyribonucleic acid, so the introns are replaced on the inside of the deoxyribonucleic acid. After the removal of the ribonucleic acid, primers has a replacement of the ribonucleic acids which are situating complementary on the deoxyribonucleic acid. The exits are sealed together by the hydrogen bonds and the gaps are eliminated on the inside of the deoxyribonucleic acid. The polymerase I will begin the relocation of the nucleic acid. There are Okazaki fragments and DNA ligase traveling in an orderly fashion across of the deoxyribonucleic acid. The pattern is repeated on the inside of the replication bubble. The error correction is approaching the completion on the inside of the replication bubble because of the 1 per 100,000 bases. So the wrong copies will be eliminated on the inside of the deoxyribonucleic acid. The polymerase I will form the phosphodiester bonds through the strand. So the ligase will add the retention to the Okazaki fragments on the inside of the replication bubble. The synthesized deoxyribonucleic acid is finishing to set up in the correct genetic code. So the deoxyribonucleic acid polymerase 3 will copy the short pieces. The polymerase 3 must copy itself by moving backwards to the new primer. The fragments are found on the lagging strand. There is termination to close the replication fork. The ribonucleic acid and deoxyribonucleic acid are encountering the termination phase. There are the many hydrogen bonds, so the enzyme will encounter a difficulty to open up the double helix. The spermatozoid has the sufficient hormones, steroids and motility, so the sperm will travel through the ejaculatory pathway on the inside of the vas deferens. The ejaculatory duct and prostate gland do fuse at the urethra. The jizz will pass up the urethra. The bulbourethral gland will release oil, so the urethra is clear and lubricated for the jizz. The cum will be accorded the alkaline properties. The spermatozoa will be able to survive the acidity of the female reproductive system. The spermatozoid will ejaculate out of the meatus and into the female Deinonychus antihopus dinosaur reproductive system. The spermatozoid will travel through the vagina. The G1 phase will occur on the inside of the female. The cells are in a less condensed state as the chromatin. The ribonucleic acid polymerase will preserve the deoxyribonucleic acid. In the G1 phase, the cell growth will occur on the inside of the Deinonychus antihopus dinosaur. The cells are preparing to become duplicated on the inside of the female reproductive system. The cells are creating the organelles for the energy on the inside of the cycle of the erection of the male reproductive organ. The complement strand is formed on the inside of the female Deinonychus antihopus dinosaur. The autosomal cells are described as diploid on the inside of the state of the living organism. There are the two of the copies of the deoxyribonucleic acid. The cellular function will continue into the S phase. The S phase will host the majority of the cancer concerns on the inside of the reproduction of the offspring. The two chromatids are bound by a centromere. In the S phase, the diploid stem cells are known as spermatogonia. The replication of the genetic material will occur to develop into the primary spermatocytes. The G2 phase does begin after the deoxyribonucleic acid is duplicated on the inside of the cell. The cell does prepare to be divided on the inside of the human host. There is twice as much of the deoxyribonucleic acid. The result of mitosis and cytokinesis is when the nucleus is formed on the cell and the check is performed on the organelles and the cytoplasm in the G2 phase of the meiosis. The p53 protein does go through the 4 stages. The paired cylindrical organelles are present on the outside of the nucleus centrosome. The centrosome will correct the deoxyribonucleic acid. The first stage is prophase. The nuclear membrane will break down on the cell, and the microfilament will be able to reshape itself during the replication of the gametes. The tryphosphate does roam on the inside of the cytoplasm. The centrioles will begin to move on the inside of the cell. The centrioles will move to the center of the cell. The spindle fibers will begin to form on the inside of the cell. The microtubules are directed on the inside of the cell for the motor protein to pass on the inside of the lumen. The chromatin is condensed into the chromatin. The histones do possess a positive charge on the inside of the protein. The proteins will condense into a group of the 8 histones. The deoxyribonucleic acid is negatively charged to tightly wrap the positive charged histones during the intermediate stage of the prophase stage of the reproductive organ. The positively charged histone does react with the negatively charged deoxyribonucleic acid on the inside of the tryphosphate. The chromosome is appellant between the positive charged protein and negative charged deoxyribonucleic acid, which does form a nucleosome. The chromatin is maintaining a 30 nm diameter on the inside of the chromosome. The asters do anchor the centrioles to the membrane. The kinetochores fibers do align the spindle fibers throughout the cell. The kintochore fibers do interact with the fibers coming from the spindle fiber apparatus. The second stage is metaphase. The chromosome will line up across of the middle of the cell. The spindle fibers will run from the centrioles to the center of the cell. This stage is emphasizing the X shape of the chromosome. The histones are consolidated on the inside of the deoxyribonucleic acid for the enablation of the nucleosome. The deoxyribonucleic acid has coiled into the 6 nucleosomes for the regulation of the solenoid. The chromosome is assembled into a X shape, which is visible in the metaphase stage through the meiosis of the cell. The third stage is anaphase. The spindle fibers do have their own distinct centromere. The spindle fibers do contract and pull the chromosome apart on the inside of the cell. Each chromosome is pulled toward the poles of the cell. The kinetofibers do shorten to pull apart to the opposite poles on the inside of the cell. The fourth stage is telophase. The chromosomes do reach each pole of the cell. The chromosomes does unwind back into the chromatin. The 30 nm diameter chromatin is initiating a coil on the inside of the chromatin. The coil is binding to the 8 of the nucleosomes for the creation of the final solenoid. The solenoid does exhibit the ecstasy while tightly condensing the 6 nucleosomes whenever enveloping the chromosomes, so the chromosome may sustain the liberation on the inside of the tryphosphate cytoplasm. The spindle apparatus does disassemble and disappears on the inside of the cell. The nuclear membrane does reform across of the cell. The DNA strand is able to stretch the 2 meters. At the end of telophase, the 2 daughter cells are present on the inside of the reproductive cycle of a baby. The copy of the genome is identical on the inside of the cells. There are sufficient supplies for an infinite number of divisions of a sperm cell. There are stages on the inside of the female deinonychus dinosaur's reproduction of the Dromaeosauridae species. The vagina leads to the uterus. The uterus leads to the ovary. There is anatomy across from the uterine tube. The oviduct does joiningly lead into the spacious fimbriae. The oogenesis cycle will have the primary follicles stimulated on the inside of the mouth's follicles. The Tyrolin's follicule is sustained with the fluid enzymes. The vesicular follicule has a oocyte being used as a hormonal epicenter. On the inside of the Graafian, the viscous oocyte is fruitful with the breadwinning nutrients. The sustenance surroundings do not form to nurture the astute oocyte. The stomaching vesicular follicule will release a secondary oocyte. The diploid oocyte is procured from the healthy ovulation of the Deinonychus antihippus. The secondary oocyte is specialized to travel to the dainty corpus luteum, and the oogenesis formation is continuing on the inside of the female Dromaeosauridae womb. The perplex hypothalamus does control the motor activities occurring on the inside of the wet ovary. The G will export the signaling follicle-stimulating hormone. The follicle-stimulating hormone release does permit the expedition into the elastic ovary. The adaptive ovary wall lining has the luteinizing hormone to emit before the dripping ovulation. The anterior pituitary peaks prior to the ovulation of the reproducing therapsid. The developing follicle will tolerantly acquire the release of the soaking oocyte. The hormone estrogen and the progesterone hormone are produced through the anterior of the pituitary gland and sends the follicle-stimulating hormone and the cells to the inside of the open follicle. The estrogen hormone is lapsed on a regulated excretion through the feedback loop. The estrogen hormone signal will travel subordinately up to the electrochemical ENSEF. The hormonal signaling will continue to accept the registered estrogen for the corpus luteum. The span of the luteum will send the progesterone to the hypothalamus until the rationing is creating a vigorous ovulating within the spunky ovary. The ovulation semblance will happen over the 28 days of the fertile life forms. The preserved follicle-stimulating hormone will develop in the follicle throughout the developmental phase of the chalky egg. The mature follicle has the potent estrogen for the timed evolution. The estrogen does continue to travel into the electric brain. The endo-thickening hormone is mass-produced for the follicle-stimulating hormone to encounter the dominoes effect throughout the saturating luteinizing hormone. The viscous luteinizing hormone does spike before the ovulation of the contractile ovary. The puny corpus luteum has a peek into the comfort of the secreting hormone. The placid endometrial lining will carry the milky egg, and send down the egg into ovarian tube. Inside of the deinonychus antihippus, there is a alerting warning. The lithium will begin to solubly dissipate into the lymphatic system. Through the endometrium lining, the compact cells will reveal less of the progesterone hormone. The hydrated egg is fertilized and the implant will happen on the inside of the endometrium lining. The sperm will add a force involving the mass of the alkaline ejaculatory fluid and guide the way into the deinonychus antihippus egg. The male deinonychus antihippus sperm will push its way into the fragile egg. The motile acrosomal head will penetrate into the shady egg. The third hydrogen bond will form on the clover leaf protein. The reproductive system biogenesis will lose the sperm flagellum and the defensive egg will permanently close while impregnating the athletic specimen. The oogenesis cycle cannot restart in 28 days after being impregnated by the spermatozoa before the remainder of the billions of the sperm cells are programmed for the death. The healthy male will accomplish the creation of the sperm for the destiny as a Deinonychus antihippus dinosaur. The Deinonychus antihippus dinosaurs do call out the communication through the echoes on the paradise Pangaea. The spiteful dinosaurs are bearing a solid ball morula. Inside of the blastocyst, the tight blastocyst is upholding the pervasive trophoblast for covering the in order to build the pulmonary chorion and chorionic villi in regards to the blasticle formation of the Deinonychus antihippus placenta. The Deinonychus antihippus will support the protective yolk sac, fluid-exchanging allantois and shock-absorbing amnion for the carnivorous embryo. The approximate 30 million base pairs are preserved into the ribbon helix before the remainder of the billions of the sperm cells are programmed for the death. The healthy male Deinonychus antihippus will continue to accomplish the creation of the exhilarated sperm for the destiny as a Deinonychus antihippus dinosaur parent. The Deinonychus antihippus dinosaurs do call out the communication through the echoes on the paradise Pangaea. The spiteful dinosaurs are exploring the depths of the welcoming jungles. The Jabinia luanhara bird's telencephalon has the muscular power and precision on the top center of the powerful enceph, and the basal ganglia clusters are enthusiastically involved in the voluntary movement of the perikaryon cell fragments. The actively saturated brain does create the endogenous build of the frolicking neurocyton. The excited neurocyton state is a constant flow with a cellular anatomy. The covering cell does possess a protective nucleus. The confiding nucleus is containing an electrical signal. The motor skills have become developed on the inside of the coined neurocyton. The cell mobility does register an engram to develop the perikaryon pathway. The perikaryon cell is assimilating into a curtail through the delivery of the genuine message. The control center does establish a desired movement while traveling the central juices. The central sulcus is designated to proscribe the stoma. The stoma is a series of reasoning with the developing message for the brain circuit. The filled cerebral cortex is the location of encoding vigor to invoke the perikaryon. The enantianathian mind does carry out an encryption through the wholesome message. The nucleus's signal does confine the encoded message. The spawning message is an active adaptation to send to the Jabinia's motor limbs. The perikaryon cell is liable involving our voluntary movements through the stomping avialia. The complex neurocyton is found on the inside of the curvaceous central sulcus folds. The rigorous neurocyton issues a circumvention of the bird's eye's trochlear IV nerve and a Duson's nerve. The perikaryon will go around of the bird's facial nerve, ear's vestibular nerve, and continue into the connecting corpus callus. The neurocyton passage will go across the parameter of the memory mammillary body. The determined neurocyton is enabled in order to swerve in front of the wake cycle's reticular activating system. The quick neuron will pass on the side of the positioning anterior commissure. The nerve cell is maneuvered past the ventricle's cord plexus. The sequenced motor neuron is going through the lapsing glutaminergic and stratominergic stratum. The hurdling motor neuron will make use of the substantia niagara dopamine. The electrical nerve will go through the regulated motor cognitive thalamus. The drastic motor neuron does go onto the memory's hippocampus. The wrangling motor neuron is able to revolve the mesencephalon. The motor neuron does pass the localized ventral tegmental area. The motor neuron will press around of the timing entorhinal cortex. The motor neuron will surpass the stress controlling diencephalon. The motor neuron has a standard route within the vertebrae forming mesencephalon area. The motor neuron does go over the autonomic organ controlling myelencephalon. The motor neuron has the potential to scurry around of the reactive functions of the bladder, esophagus, sleep, respiration, facial expressions, equilibrium, posture and taste, dilating pons in the aim to accord the limbic message. The motor neuron has its way past the voluntary controlling corticospinal tract. The motor neuron will sequence through the proprioceptive dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway. The motor neuron has an order of operations in order to get through the autonomic relay of the squiggly brain for the breathing heart muscle function and coordinating medulla oblongata. The motor neuron has a sneaking perseverance on the exterior of the detective temperature activity inside of the touching sensitivity of the spinothalamic tract, and the motor neuron will impede around the reflexive and balance detecting through the oxygenated heart half to the relayed brainstem. The passing motor neuron can be traced to through the holistic brainstem and 19 vertebrae. There is a neurotransitioning fluid on the inside of the tense spinal cord. The viscous corticospinal fluid is ordered to carry out the trivial planning brain. The experienced liquid does travel cyclically through the formed spinal cord. The cortical spinal fluid will palmally travel along with the carried motor neurons. The dinosaur meningeal fluid does transport the statuesque motor neuron for the palmar flow after transitioning from the upper motor neuron. The gymnenus upper motor neuron has transcended into the equidistant lower motor neurons, which is storing and gaining momentum on the inside of the brain's gray matter. The three types of motor neurons are responding to the sensory neurons respond to touch, light or sound. The delicate sensory neuron will affect the nudging cell through the sensory organs. The sensory neuron will send the direct signals across of the elongated spinal cord. The vital motor neuron does receive the adaptation signaling from the working spinal cord. The sensory signaling is controlling the antagonist and agonist motor muscle contractions across of the elastic muscle. The sensory neuron is linked directly to the glandular output as synthesis endocrine in order to release the tempered hormones. The interneurons do connect sensory neurons to other sensing neurons within a neural circuit on the inside the cylindrical spinal cord. The lasting nerves do become rapidly produced within the first 2 years of the life of the roaring bird. In the somatosensory, the neuron's pathways does pass on to the updated motor neuron. The finalized message is ended at the axon's terminal for the pressed motor neuron. The frequent axon terminal is the responsive area for the sensory neuron's connection or respondence to neuroreceptors on the inside of the enantiomere somatosensory. The fundamental somatosensory is filled with the detecting thermoreceptors. The follicle mechanoreceptors are smooth and hairless on the feathery bird. The hydrostatic chemoreceptor has a sensor made of the internal chemicals for the biological signal. The pericardium does move through the afferent nerve fibers. The axonal projections are attached to the defensive spinal cord. The afferent nerve fibers are responsive to the subdue sensory signal for the sensory neuron site. The sensory neurons do convert a specific stimulus through the maximum occupant spinal cord. The flaring sensory neurons do travel via the spatial receptors. The axonal projection membrane of the stoma will refractally depolarize the outer nucleus. The breakdown of the membrane will begin to expose the signaling message to release into cell form. The descriptive cells will exchange and communicate through the moving bird. So the AV procedure to complete the mobility being persecuted into the statuesque cell. There is a lipid lard which does cover the connective axon. The lardia adipocytes is allowing an opening to the space-filling myelinated axon. The electric action potential does pass down the surging myelinated axon, so the effectual cell can elaborate to the avian physique. The powerful action potential has to enter through the menostages on the interior of the expansive axon terminal, and the inclusive stages do pass on the axon through the atypical axon terminal. So the linked neurocytin does enter into the lipid-rich substance. The fatty substance does increase the action potential, which will speed up the spiky message. The cushioning oligodendrocytes are applied as the insulation produce the powerful axon. The loose oligodendrocytes do create the soft myelinated sheath. The cognate peripheral nervous system does receive the cushioning oligodendrocyte because the Schwann cells energetically issuing the electrical charge. The impulsive neurocytin is communicating through while processing throughout the striked axon. The armed Schwann cells do wrap around of the exerted motor neuron for the development of the encrypted neurocytin. The visionary neurocytin is engaging into a regeneration through the free axon. The progressive neurocytin movement is entering the trophic support to change the hot axon. The embodying neurocytin will be producing the nerve's extracellular matrix. The aerodynamic neurocytin will modulate the neuromuscular synaptic activity on the inside of the opened axon. The pushing neurocytin has abundance of the antigens for the T lymphocytes. The pressured cells do communicate from the one neurocytin to the next neurocytin, so the emphatic neurocytin engages into the mobility of the lapsing terminal. The fueled neurocytin does pass through a senile node of Ranvier. The programmed axilloma is overtly exposed to the flowing extracellular space across of the stationed axon. The immersive charge under the node of Ranvier is highly concealing the ion channels. The static motor neurons are induced into the tight ion channels, so the connective ion channels will regenerate the action energy of the vigorous neurocytin. There is one node of Ranvier which is leading to the next to issue the mobility code since the voluntary action issuance by the motor neuron, so the sparking neurocytin will activate other motor neuron. The action energy is increased and the conduction velocity is ascending across of the narrow axon until the spreading axon terminal, and the charge is producing the microvoltage. The flowing axon terminal is spread into a further and expansive telodendron. The free synaptic bouton will store a sharp neurotransmitter. The transitionary neurotransmitter is known to possess the soluble sodium. The rigid sodium does become attached to the aqueous motor neuron membrane and releases messages continually at the gaping synapse. There are many synaptic junction across the perplex axon. The wrapped motor neurons are connected to chain of entering motor neurons for the communicating mobility. The poised motor neurons will lead with the exclusive message. The diasodium will open up the message of the emerging motor neuron, so the motor neuron will timely depolarize completely through the tolerant telodendron. The compact ion channels are open to accept the muscular functionality message on the inside of the motor neuron message, and the patient ion channels will increase the delivery of the coded message. The electric membrane potential does go through the many changes across of the spacious channel, so there is a powerful influx of the potent sodium channel before the changing polarity, and the reactive plasma membrane does go through the reverse on the inactivate ion channels. The sodium channels are instantly impenetrable by the gauging sodium. The motor neuron message is secure throughout the final terminal. The fidgeting sodium is channeled to send back out the decayed membrane into the bodily pathway as discharged waste. The plasma membrane does pass on the filled messages to the potassium channel. The potassium channels do become active across of the plasma membrane. The potassium ions are returned to the electrochemical gradient on the inside of the analogous creature's spine. There is a tolerant phase after the energetic hyperpolarization of the flickering motor neuron. The sparking motor neuron does fall between the normal resting potential through the animal membrane. The voltage-gated potassium channels are opened within the structured membrane. The original resting membrane polarization is a calcium 2 cation and potassium channel. The potassium cation channel does become more negative within the bird membrane. The VM is driven to the potassium equilibrium voltage EK. The hyperpolarization does persists to redirect the fundamental motor neuron, so the potassium cation membrane permeability will return to the normal state at the ending telodendron. The electrical signal travels through the skeletal-muscular system and delivers the instructive message. The back's vertebrae's lower motor neurons do create the movement to the bird's wings and provides the full mobility from the direct order to the winged forelimbs. The message is received and self-destructed on the inside of the worsted space. The enantianith's hollow bones are capable of receiving a chain of motility messages to lift the light bones for the Jabinia luanharis flapping wings to take flight into the low sky. The speed of the Nanotyrannus lacensis is the quickest terrible reptile at 80.47 km per hour on the Pangi-optimal terrain. The startling carnivores were also walking on the robust earth. The disturbing carnivore is a dangerous dinosaur on the open Pangi. The prowling carnivore does have a resemblance to the evil smaller jaw. The Carnosaurus also does have the two of the horns. The smaller Orthonelia does possess a smaller figure inside of the Ornithopoda reptiles. The Dilophosaurus witherally is a quaint dinosaur. The 7 meter and 400 kilogram Nearthropoda has a foreskin surrounding the sterncleidomastoid, anterior triangle of neck and nuptial line. The thin skin is used in a defensive way to scare off the angular dinosaurs. The Saurischean dino is protecting the delicate skull. The theropod carnivore was found near the shallow rivers. The Dilophosaurus wetherili would feed on the flopping fish. In the deep forests, the mosquito swats would fly sharply through the shady trees. The Culiceta limnoscata has fluttered near the dark and cool pine trees. The mosquito's tarsus are able to stably land onto the Spinosaurus keratin and using the clinging tibia and fibia to support the stance on top of the terrible lizard. The mosquito's wings are still while balancing the genitalia to the proboscis curving nose. The elongated tube does create a equilibrium to keep inside of the red eyes, hairy palp and hanging antenna. The frightening head of the cringing mosquito does lower to insert the long needle nose. The penetrating nose is submerged into the thick keratin. The tube does travel deep into the Spinosaurus aegyptiacus and anywhere in the muscle or a vein will draw enough blood for the mosquito's internal temperature. The fluttering mosquito will withdraw the nose and flee to the quaint swamps. The violent mosquito will allure a mate for producing the dainty eggs. The 200 quivering eggs will hatch into the pesky larva. The evolutionary state will slowly turn into the festering Culiceta limnoscata. The spry Elaopteryx noxae is categorized as the slim Maniraptora. The thin Elaopteryx noxae is an aggressive ectomorph across of the unwinding forests. The scary Elaopteryx noxal dinosaur has a exocrine system which is used to secrete the boy's waste products. The chordata dinosaur does continue to sweat out the oozing toxins. The mammary exocrine will release the milky galactose and viscous lactose through the mammillary alveoli. The ceruminous glands will drain from small to the large glands through the intimidating Maniraptor dinosaur. The ceruminous exocrine are the wax buildup on the inside of the dictaphonic ears. The horrid Elaopteryx noxal endorsining does have a mixture with the sebum fluid for the opening of the hair follicle. The aerobic and anaerobic exercises will create a sudoriferous secretion through the keratin epithelial. The sweat is made up of a chemical compound from the consumption-loading compilation of the undesirable waste from the shuddering Elaopteryx noxal. Inside of the pine-green conifers forests, the Macabramasaurus patagonicus is known to lay its teeny eggs. The egg size is measured at 1 inch tall on a brush nest. Prosauropod dinosaurs would abandon the new nest. The late Cretaceous period was a ecocidic scorch on the Earth's forest. The lava dome, composite and shield volcanoes did become bubblingly gaseous on the inside of the Earth core. The magma chamber is suffering from the scorching heat and rising into the conduit pipe. The branch pipes would submerge a small reservoir sill, but the leaking dike would escape from a parasitic cone via the side vent. The throat summit does release openly into the aerotroposphere. The volcanic crater does seep over the volcano rim and cause a lava flow. The sulfuric acid will rise into the clouds and bioaccumulate. The hot magma is rushing and leaking down the volcano flank. The magma internal temperature is a blistering 7,000 degrees Celsius. The hot magma will cause a char all over the circumference of the erupting volcano and pass traversingly at 10 km/h into the agroforest. The magma's touch would instantly set aflame to the tree's bark, dead leaves or broken sticks. The entire volcanic eruption is a natural disaster to any of the creature's habitat. The pyroclastic debris is messy and irritant to inhale by all of the nearby dinosaurs. The basal Compsognathi longipes are prowling in the carnivorous herds of the alongside of the littlest Mahacula omnogavy accompaniment through the mint-green jungle for the pounce onto a Bavarius or Macrodactylus. The 1-foot-tall groups of the small dinosaurs would nibble and gnaw on the 30-centimeter defenseless Bavarisaurus Macrodactylus. The daring crustacean have evolutionarily grown through the Paleogene extinction on the inside of the penetrable air. This catastrophic event had ended 3/4 of the living organisms on the rich Earth. Incoming. There is a 6-mile-wide asteroid headed toward the natural Earth. The fatal asteroid does travel at a lethal 40 miles per hour and vertically descends to the vulnerable Earth. The Crateric asteroid is approaching above of the 5.98 × 10 to the exponent 28 mass of the Earth and gaining the speed on the shielded Earth through the atmosphere ozone layer. The Crateric asteroid is striking down onto the hard Earth and is a caustic threatening cloud of the unbearable debris. The killer impact will be as large as 180 tons of trinitrotoluene blowing up on the urgent gradient of the suspended Earth. The hit of the meteor is portuned to a melting point to transform the graphite elements into the theoretically indestructible ions dallite atom. The hot surface does consolidate the imperial units in the alpha decay pressuring isotopic stoichiometry. The dust cloud is known to create a large tier of the minuscule dust mites and fabricate a particle block on the inside of the sublime atmosphere. The dust matter has blocked the yellow sun. The high-powered sun could not shine the ultraviolet, visible, and infrared rays photons across of the electromagnetic wave. The 5,800 degrees Kelvin sun rays are prevented from the ability to reach the native plantae, local metazoa and the colonized Anthropodsta. The tiny periwinkle flowers were shockingly vulnerable to the Newton's universal law of thermodynamics. Inside of an isolated system, the energy is not transferred from one living organism to the other inside of the isolated system of the planet Earth. The small vinca minor plants felt the potential energy stressfully increasing on the breathing pedals. Once the meteor impacted the injured Earth, the planet was suffering the high records of the vibrating earthquakes to the mountainous stratosphere. The ground was shredded by the weight of the 6-mile-wide asteroid. The tall trees were ripped out of the black soil because of the longitudinal and transverse waves as the result of the bashing meteor. The obliterated rocks were sent through the barricaded air. The damaged photosynthesizers had not received their cellulose energy underneath of the blocked ozone layer in front of the cadmium sun. The greenhouse gas was bioaccumulating across of the thriving Earth. The striving Earth did encounter a large tsunami, record-breaking tidal waves and high tide. The deep water did seep into the gummy forests and cause water damage to the occupied habitat. The aerobic dinosaurs were introduced into the high amounts of the liquid H2O and forced to gasp to hold on to the fresh air. The suffering dinosaurs are choking to collect the quintessential oxygen. The space-filling water was filling the inside of the lung cavity. The abundant water did take up the air gaps on the inside of the wet lungs. The body's formula was unbalanced while suffocating from the watery lungs. The dinosaurs did lose the oxygen levels required to cycle inside of the vital organs. There was a forceful water did choke until the death in the peaceful departure from the transfixed Earth. Fortunately, the ectothermic species have survived with the resistance to the clash of the debilitating asteroid. The fending leatherback turtle has withstood the abolishment of their fellow species. The bland planet is living without the other bolstering tetrapods. The enforced four-legged creatures and braceful aves are extinct on the engulfed Earth. The solid sediment of the unsettling asteroid has remained on the foundation of the durable Earth. The meteor deposit is smoldering graphite being transformed into the carbon elatropions dalite. The lathered sediment is known to us from the KPG event on the shallow shore. The letter K is a confidant of the word Cretaceous, and the consonants PG are the expedient of the name Pangaea. The high amount of transitionary earth iridium metal was prevalent across of the Mexican, South American Earth. The subsistence of the iridium metal was carefully mined in Chicxulub, Mexico, South America. The Yucatan, Chicxulub, Mexico, South America shore does evidently show the resultant epitome of the kismet blow of the disastrous meteor. The iridium transition metal is rare on the piles of the Earth's crust but large in mass on the chronically threatening asteroids. The soft clay in the Gulf of Mexico has permanent remnants of the impact of the violent asteroid. The damaging asteroid has left an acidic ocean. In the paleoceanography, the H2O puissance hydrogen level on the inside of 30% saline ocean has caused an inhabitable environment for the aquatic life forms. The puissance hydrogen level has decreased on the inside of the big tethys, panthalastic and dark paleotethys through the world. The 30–40% of carbon dioxide does become cleansed by the self-efficacy of the cerulean ocean. The carbon dioxide was declining on the inside of the opaque oceans. The high acidic puissance hydrogen does cause the symptoms pertaining to the harmful characteristics on the living organisms. The bleached coral have populated the majority of the labile ocean. The calcifying organisms are difficult to contribute their charisma on the inside of the stigmatized paleotethys ecosystem. There were magnanimous benefits deriving from the paleologenic extinction on the inside of the resilient Earth. The alpha decay biohazardous radioactivity calcium did curtail the adaptation of the transitionary chlorinic lives of the prolific creatures. So the half-hazardous sea creature chlorine level may be survived by the horse erosion of the hard paleotethys Earth. The life expectation of the creatures were threatened by the chloromethane reactive reagent through the paleotethys water. The courageous leatherback turtles did survive the fatality of the paleologenic extinction with the other co-inhabitants. The turtle does possess the keratin for the cover on top of the alkali calcified skull. On the Dermochles coriacea, the cervical vertebrae are able to bend at the protected neck. The covered pectoral girdle is separating the thorax and the head of the enclosed turtle. The two forelimbs does protrude from the epiplastron shell. The epiplastron keratin is connected to the scaly entoplastron. The smooth hyoplastron and hypoplastron are fastened to the body's iphiplastron. The pelvic girdle is providing a sufficient space to protrude the hind limb. The small tail is also sticking out of the tight shell. The menapigal plates are connecting to the neural plates. All of the turtle shell is present to protect the Dermocheles coriacea. The dire contortions of the Pleistocene extinction did occur within the 2,500,000 years to the planet Earth. The fossilized dinosaur skeletal remains do locate in Utah, South Dakota, Texas, California, and Wyoming on the inside of the salvageable condition of the skeletal systems for the sovereign dinosaurs. The biophysical deoxyribonucleic acid has lost the genome for each of the passing 521 years on the inside of the laboratory. The chemists and biologists are researching the preservation of the bone cells. The genetic information is lost by half under the glass slide or inside of the centrifuged test tubes throughout the osteocytes on the inside of the science laboratory. The scientists and biologists are unearthing the genome for the discovery of the living atoms. The atom does possess an electron shelf. The shelves are pertaining to the negative charge of the molecule shelves. The positively charged electrons are attracted to the negative charge of the shelves. The electrons are locating on the shelves and are constantly in motion on the valence electron shelves. The electron is a positively charged subatomic particle and the energy is constantly in motion across of the stable atom. The specific bonds are different between the category of the elements. The electrons during the covalent bond. The covalent bond is between the two of the non-metals. The covalent bond will share the electrons. The covalent bond will sink the elements for the stability of the elements. The acceptant octet will fill and become balanced on the wholesome molecule. The complete octet will have a high electronegativity through the London dispersion force. The element will possess the strongest electronegativity for the multivalent electrons. On the bone cell, the atom are electrostatically excited to the full potential of the calcium and hydrogen on the inside of the bone. The ground state of the inner shelves are quintessential to the van der Waals force of the bone serology. The ionic bond is a bond between a metal and a non-metal on the inside of a molecule. The ionic bond does possess the same octet rules through the genome molecule. The valence electrons are found on the outer shelf. The valence electron will use an interdependent weight from the stabilization of the new tetrahedral molecule. The non-metal and the metals will enact a full octet on the electron shelf. The two types of states will have to pair on the outer shelf of the enabled molecule. The osteocyte particles are continuing to move from the ionic bond on the inside of the calcified bone. The calcium metal and the subsumed bone cells electrons are shared to stabilize the essential molecule for the hydrated calcium phosphate. The warm temperature is pulverizing the vapor from the specialized cells and harming the zinc, copper, calcium, sulfur, chlorine, potassium, titanium, iron and nickel found on the inside of the skeletal remains. The genetic code is difficult to uncover on the inside of the bone because of the age of the buccal swab sample, and the genome is scattered throughout the bone. The traces of the genome have become hidden throughout the structure of the prehistoric life form. Inside of the Earth's nature, the carbon element is found naturally as the biomagnificating C12 and C13. Scientists' equipment can use these trace amounts to determine the approximate age of the organism's holotype. In addition to radioactive dating, carbon-14 is also used in a variety of other ways. The carbon dating can be used to study abnormalities of metabolism which are underlying sugary diabetes, ether gout, insufficiency anemia levels and growth acromegaly. There are fragments which are preserved and indicating the facts about the vigorous dinosaurs. The genetic code fragments are scattered, broken apart and have dissolved through the hundreds of the millions of years after the KPG extinction on the planet Earth. The savvy scientists have uncovered the ways to invent the TECHI technology for the assessment of the segments of the genome. The scientific discovery of the equipment has produced the FTI device. The FTI machine is utilized on the inside of the science laboratory for the dinosaur germs. The organism's germs are made up of the sequence of the three of the genomes for the analysis under the FTI technology. The FTI gadget is able to photograph the molecular bonds on the inside of the holotype bone intramedullary for the research of the unearthed genome. The cobalt-60 isotope is used in electromagnetic radiation by separating electrons through a specification hadron collider for the vibratingly split electrons. Although having uncovered the advanced piece of technology, the machine's equipped state is incapable with the current state of the biotechnology optic lens for salvaging the full genome. so the genetic segments may be enlarged sufficiently to show the metatypes of the nucleic acids and stop codon. The advanced technology of the 21st century is currently finding the funding to research the deoxyribonucleic acid for the nucleic acids, translation and transcription of the genome. Over the centuries of research, there are helpful charities, thoughtful donations and the rich scientists contributing to the research of the resurrection of the dinosaur inhabitant. The intelligent scientists are going through the experimentation phases to uncover a powerful operature to enhance the microscopic genome but have encountered the issues with the enlargement of the deoxyribonucleic acid. In the 21st century, the scientific computations have resulted in determining the replication of the deoxyribonucleic acid from all dinosaurs is futile to resurrect or clone the terrible lizard. In the safe planet Earth, the beloved dinosaurs may not be brought back to life as a genetic engineered clone of the prehistoric dinosaurs. The half-life of the deoxyribonucleic acid has ceased to be recovered after 1,500,000 years of the unpredictable circumstances of the unprecedented sequence of events on the bone for the FT machine. The sciences are honing in on the inside of the genetically majestic cellular anatomy of the osteocyte and uncovering the phosphodiester bonds between the nucleic acids and the ecological state of the hydroxide bonds individually disappearing while leaving only the traces of the stoic genome after the 1 million years of life inside of the periosteum. But the dinosaur may with the right technological advancements made by the scientists be brought back to the life on the 7 of the continents for the 4,500,400,000 30-year-old inside of the third planet throughout the solar system.